This regular meeting of the City Council, June 4th, roll call.
Mayor Brinkman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallman.
Here.
Councilmember Beckman.
Here.
Councilmember Sunanek.
Present.
Councilmember Cole. Here. Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember Valdez.
Here.
And so we need a motion to go into an exec session. Bruce?
Okay, I move City Council convene an executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute, Section 24-6-402, Sub 4, Sub E, for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiation, and instructing negotiators regarding the city attorney legal services contract with the firm of Kissinger and Fellman, P.C. Attending the executive session will be all of City Council, City Manager Penny.
And that's all.
And that
Eric.
is it.
Eric is in there.
And then,
Oh, and Eric Von Savage.
Von Savage.
thank you, and Eric Von Savage. And Council will return, okay, that's
Second.
you actually, so I'll stop there.
Okay. Council will return to regular session following the exec session. It will not be any later or earlier than 7 p.m.
Second.
Okay, ready to vote?
The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Bummer.
Okay, mics are on. Okay, we're going to call to order or reconvene our regular meeting. Will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? City Clerk, I want to confirm we did do the roll call before.
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Okay. Okay, we have no minutes to approve. But let me just step back. Approval of the agenda. Bruce.
Madam Chair, I'd like to remove item 9D, the consideration of a motion to approve contract for legal services with Kissinger and Fellman, P.C.
Okay. Second. Okay. Any objections? Okay, we will go ahead and remove that from the agenda this evening. Any other changes? With that, the agenda is approved. Comments and reports, City Manager.
None at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Cole?
I want to displace them.
Oh, geez. Do you need the thing on? Doug?
You will.
We get it any bigger than that? Otherwise, I'll have to pick it up and read it. I wanted to share with the community this. This is a promo for an event on, I think it's
July 1st.
Thanks, July 1st. You can read it for me, Phil, if you want. Anyway, but this is Hands for Baby Jameson, who was, as you can see in the upper left, has no hands. And you can see the athlete in the bottom right who has no hands. And so on July 1 at
1:30 to 3:30.
Go ahead and read it, Phil. Go ahead and
Oh,
read it.
I'm not reading it, that's up here.
I will hold it and then I'll put it back. So everybody is welcome to join the folks at Health South that's on Mineral just east of Windermere for an inspiring presentation from Hector Picard, a nationally known bilateral triathlete, 3-time Ironman, and founder of Don't Stop Living, LLC. Picard, a former Health South patient, will provide a motivational presentation about overcoming obstacles that are hindered by his disability. This is a wonderful event from 1:30 to 3:30 on July 1, and if you're interested, you can RSVP to Lisa Hinton. Actually, if you let me know, you email me, I will send you the RSVP information. So, and you can contact me through information on the city website. Thank you.
Councilmember Taylor?
Yes, I'm only going to give a Dr. Cog report. The Metro Vision Implementation Task Force met. We had update on the construction defects investigation that's going on, and Boomer Bond, the aging phenomenon report was given. CDOT has released the eligible ramp projects for special funding. C470 was on this list as regionally significant, but it's not on Dr. Cog's physically constrained regional transportation plan. That we will submit that later this summer to get on the plan, assuming that we will get some funding to work on C470. And that's all.
Okay. Councilmember Stallman.
Yes, just wanted to express appreciation and kudos to the VFW and American Legion for the Memorial Day services at Littleton Cemetery and Kettering Park, which were moving as they are every year. Thank you.
Councilmember Valdez.
Yes. With summertime being here, I just want to remind everybody as you ride your bike, wear those helmets. I don't wear a helmet that often myself, but a friend of mine did have a collision, head-on collisions, and the helmets helped. Didn't help her wrist, which broke, and the other person's arm that broke, but they can talk about it at least. On Sunday, June 9, from 9 a.m. till 3 p.m., that's this Sunday, at Arapahoe Community College, it will be the location for the exotic sports car show, which I think some of you may have attended last year. It's benefiting the cerebral palsy of Colorado. Over 450 cars, many of them rare, will be on display. I am told that all proceeds from the event will benefit CP of Colorado's children's program. So it's a great event. Check out the cars. There's some one of only types there. It's pretty cool. If you will, just go to www.cpco.org. That's Charlie Papa Charlie Oscar.org. And one of our neighbors is one of the main, as one of the organizers for this event. He's passionate about the cars, but I think even more passionate about helping out the children of Colorado in our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cernanek.
Yes, while we're in the middle of the summer and we all have that beach time and other opportunities, reminder of the summer adult reading program at Bemis Library, Delve into Our Past. You have a chance to pick up the brochure. There's a reading list that is there, and in the next week and a half is the 48th anniversary of the 1965 flood. It was the week of June 14, 1965, so one of the items prominently addressed in some of the history that's there. The Economic Development Group's Real Estate Breakfast is during the CML conference this year. The staff is coordinating in attendance. And Michael, if Denise is also looking for additional folks to possibly invite as city guests to fill out the table, do let us know, because I have some folks in mind on that. Yep. And with regard to the Legislative Action Committee at the Chamber, one of the things that's being done this year is actually to take the positions that the Chamber took on business issues and to provide a report that indicates all the legislatures and what positions they took in committee votes as well as floor votes on those issues, and that will be coming. And talking about bicycling, Happy Trails is going to be on June 22nd, as well as the Dr. Cog Bike to Work Day on June 26th. So make sure whether you're wearing a helmet or not, and I recommend wearing a helmet, make sure you're getting in bike shape. Thank you.
Councilmember Beckman?
I don't have anything tonight.
Okay. Councilmember Taylor, you had one other thing?
Yes, I did. I did want to mention that the Littleton Block Party on Main Street is occurring Saturday, starting at 6 p.m. There will be several stages and entertainment, and 2 fireworks shows will be going on that night, so everybody's welcome to attend. And then the fire muster and parade is on June the 15th. It's also coming from Littleton High School and Champ area down Main Street, and will do their muster at ACC in the afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, we have no guest citizens this evening and no scheduled public presentations, so... Okay, we have no one scheduled on the agenda for a guest citizen. Okay, pardon me. So what we'll do is move that to unscheduled public appearances. Unscheduled public appearances are an opportunity for any citizen to express an opinion or ask a question regarding city services, council policies, or other matters of community concern that are not part of the scheduled agenda. Generally, an immediate response should not be expected. Typically, issues are referred to city staff for follow-up information or research and reported back to the council and the individual that initiated the comment or the inquiry. I do want to make a special note this evening that we do have public hearings on 3 ordinances, and we also, the items under general business are not public hearings, but if you would like to make comments about any of those, the time to come down would be now and unscheduled. If anybody would like to come down, you have 4 minutes to speak, and we'll need your name and address. Please raise your hand if you'd like to come down. Sir?
Good evening. My name is David Buck. My address is 3559 North Summit Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm the president of the Meadowwood Corporation that owns Meadowwood Village. My remarks concern items 9A and 9B. We have worked with the City of Littleton and the people at Breckenridge Brewery and Designs by Sundown on the development. We've had 3 concerns there. They involved noise from the restaurant, the development of Briarwood Avenue, and the drainage from the Ridgeview Gulch and Turtle Lake. Working with the City Council and the other parties involved, all of those items have been satisfied have been dealt with to our satisfaction. We're pleased with this development and think it will be good for Littleton.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sir?
My name is Jim Gruber. I'm at 10,000 East Yale, Denver, Colorado. And I'm here to talk about to object to the development agreement, site development plan improvement agreement regarding the neighboring site, which adjoins the redevelopment of the Breckenridge site on 2 sides. We have received this development agreement 5 business days ago, and had no input in it whatsoever. The original agreement, when we were faced with this, did not give us any public access to the light. We were able to get CDOT to give the City of Littleton notice that that is not a grant by the neighbor, but a requirement that we have access to that light. They now acknowledge that we need this access. This access agreement makes a very one-sided decision, giving the Hummels complete control of this access agreement. they're asking us to pay for half of the costs or our pro rata share of these costs with zero input from us. Specifically, there's no requirement that Breckenridge or the DBS, Designs by Sundown, that they build security gates, only that we are to pay for them. In general, we just want to have some voice in this. They're asking us to build gates, which should not be put on this public access to our property. They are asking for different gatings. It is, I mean, I can read this to you, or I could turn it in as an exhibit, which would be better.
You can turn it in
Okay.
to the city clerk.
So that's our objection is we're going to pay for it. We should have some voice in it. They can put it wherever they want, any way they want. They can gate it. They can ask us to pay for security on it. We're happy to, we want this access. It is half of the people that will come to our site will be using this light access. That's not something they're giving us. They require it in order to get the light approved. So it is our opinion we need that access, and we need to have some voice in the development of that access.
And I'm sorry, which property were you?
Is this?
This one here.
Property, yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Frank?
I'll need the opaque projector also.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Doug? Thank you.
Smaller.
My name is Frank Atwood. I'm at 7094 South Castilla Street and would like to remind the Littleton citizens and community that are interested in alternative voting methods that there'll be an election commission meeting tomorrow morning at 9:30 in the community room next door, and part of the approval will be part of the agenda will be approval voting, and I hope that anybody that attends that I can join them for lunch at Jose's after the meeting. Thank you. Additionally, I'd like to remind potential city council candidates that there'll be a forum this Thursday evening from 6 to 8 o'clock in the community room, and I'd encourage individuals to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Anyone else? Pam?
Good evening, council and staff. My name is Pam Jadborn, and I live at the corner of Crestline in Nevada in District 1, and I'm here to recognize my neighbor's garden. I've put them on PowerPoint view graphs, and my printer doesn't do it justice, so sorry about that. Let me tell you why I'm taking the city's time tonight to talk about this garden. The gardens are at Crestline in Santa Fe. It's one of 6 entrances and exits to downtown Littleton. It's a gateway. And right now, and you can see where it is, there's Santa Fe and the Essex House, and on the other side of the street is a house that was converted to a business. And in front there, like I say, doesn't do it justice, but irises, a bunch of small flowers, and seen from the walkway, looking toward the west, you can see Santa Fe backed up there today. They've created a little path, and there's going to be sunflowers in the middle, and in the back there's going to be pumpkin vines and other kind of vegetables, as well as these flowers. So the sunflowers bring goldfinches and bees and other native wildlife here. I know Iris and Dr. Stux and several other people maintain this. They have planted natives and xeriscapes as much as they can in an attractive layout. I don't have that skill, so I really appreciate it. They use minimal to no chemicals. It's all manual tending all season. and even off-season, low water use irrigation system and plants. And they've been there almost 20 years. I talked to Councilmember Taylor last summer or fall, and I think there's no city recognition program for this kind of thing, so I wanted to mention it because I think these folks have done a heck of a lot of work. Littleton has benefited from this. And so, unfortunately, I think there's a political side to this right now. There's a contribution to the hometown feel of Littleton that these folks have made for decades. And we've heard this over and over from citizens speaking. Council members have said it. An asset for Littleton is the hometown feel. This garden provides that hometown feel at a significant intersection for Littleton. Some of the considerations that the council is making now would totally wipe out this kind of garden. There's no provision in the economic plan or the comprehensive plan to preserve this kind of thing. So I'd like you to consider that, but I don't want that to spoil my message, which is let's recognize the contribution of these folks, their time, their effort in making this little spot of beauty at a significant intersection for Littleton. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Pam. Anybody else? John?
Good evening, Council. John Watson, 4500 West Hinsdale Avenue, Littleton, 80128. Just some procedural matters. Frank wanted me to correct the approval voting agenda. It's June 5th is Wednesday, and also the council candidate forum is actually June 6th, Thursday, 6 to 8. So I wanted to correct those for Frank, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Atwood. Also, I wanted to indicate procedurally, I think the Planning Review Board at their hearing, which I attended, which was its own ruckus, I guess, wasn't actually a hearing that's being continued. In my mind, it was postponed until a further date, which is requiring a 60-day notice. I'm not sure of the dates and times procedurally if it's going to be accurate to continue it to July 6th, if you hear that on your consent agenda. I also think the Planning Review Board's decision to postpone it for 45 days wasn't a postponement at all. It was a cancellation of the hearing and a reset without the 60 days notice requirement. And I know our obstructionist friend who commented on that had the same concerns, and I'm not sure procedurally that it was done correctly. I point that out because there will be further issues, I think, with the Broadstone project, and I would think you'd want to do it appropriate procedurally as well as trying to be accurate on the hearing when you have it. Secondarily, I feel that the citizens weren't given any input on the item which shows as your consent agenda, general business for item number 9A. I certainly wasn't aware of any planned changes in the tax structure, permits, or building fees at the time of the zoning application. I know the citizens that I'm familiar with wholeheartedly supported the Breckenridge Brewery and the zoning change, but none of us had any indication until the agenda was posted and until tonight what the specifics were of any sales tax abatements, which are hundreds of thousands of dollars, and also the fees and permits that were being waived. I'm on the Board of Building Appeals, and I would think I would know logically if there were going to be any building fees or permit fees that were going to be waived to the extent of 1/2 of the building and permit fees. And to find out months later that these were all in the process of an extensive document while the zoning went through, and traditionally these things are resolved at the time of the zoning, not months later as a special consideration on a zoning that's already been approved, that the citizens weren't given an adequate input. This will be the only input we're going to have as citizens on the several changes to the zoning that's already been granted. And it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, we spend time on plastic bags for a few $100s and soda taxes are a few $100s at City Council when we let the hundreds of thousands of dollars go through our hand. I feel like we're walking over nickels, walking over dollars to pick up nickels on some of these things. We have no input on hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees, and yet we've got plenty of time to talk about soda taxes. It just seems to be misplaced reliance. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Doug?
Hope you noticed I dressed up for you tonight. These
You
are my
what?
good- I dressed up for you. These are my good jeans.
Thanks, Doug. Did you get a haircut?
What you have in front of you, oh, sorry, Doug Clark, 2454 Houston Way. What you have in front of you is a chart on the viewer prepared by your financial department showing the actual sales tax revenue collected by the city from 1997 through 2012. That's the blue line. In addition to that, you have the red line where they took the amount of sales tax collected in 1997 and indexed that up each year for inflation, showing you what the sales tax revenue would be if it increased at the rate of inflation, the difference between the two. The amount that the blue line is above the red line is how much more sales tax revenue you've collected over those 15 years than what the inflation rate is. I can tell you that if your finance department were to prepare you that same type of chart for the total general fund revenue, you would have the same chart. I know I have studied, I was looking at 2000 through 2010, and the amount that the general fund total revenue increased was actually more than the retail sales tax revenue increased. Now, only in government would we have an increase like this and characterize that as a flat economic indicator, which is here for the economic plan. The incentive package that you're considering tonight is very bad, and I explain to you why it's very bad. The chart that you have in front of you shows you why incentives aren't needed. Because Littleton's economic development policy for the some 20-some years until it was changed a couple weeks ago eschewed any kind of incentives. And yet we had an economic growth reflected by the retail sales tax increase and total general fund revenue. And that excludes new revenue sources like the EMT and the permit plan, which is about $2.5 million increase. But I think there's three reasons why incentives are bad. And the first one is they're arbitrary, especially this incentive package that's happening tonight. You are providing incentives in the name of encouraging businesses to locate into Littleton, the businesses who had already decided to locate in Littleton. Breckenridge already decided to move into Littleton when they got their zoning, which happened before you approved an economic plan which allowed you to give incentives. There's no way that they could have made that decision based on getting incentives because they made the decision before the council changed the policy. Designs by Sundown has been talking and planning to move to the city before Michael Penny was hired. I can remember Jim Woods talking about having discussions with Design by Sundowns. And that was in a period when it's obvious that we had no economic incentives because we didn't have any until a couple weeks ago. In other words, you're giving or considering giving economic incentives to two businesses in the plan that's in front of you just because. Because some staff members went out to lunch with them? Because you personally like to drink beer? Because the business owners are the right race? I mean, the materials that your staff has submitted to you to justify these incentives, your own materials, say that the policy area being cited as one of the justifications for giving the incentives is one of the more nebulous areas of urban planning. When you decide to give out hundreds of thousands of dollars to some businesses but not to other businesses, in part based on what your own documents say is nebulous public policy, then that decision is arbitrary. Second reason is these incentives and all incentives, in fact, are fundamentally unfair. It is unfair to choose specific individual businesses to receive government money and to choose others to not receive money. Whatever tax dollars Breckenridge and Designed by Sundowns is providing is no better than the tax dollars provided by Aspen Grove, Melting Pot, or any of the other businesses in Littleton. But what's more unfair, at least to me, is that you're using these incentives to take money out of my pocket to enhance the profit of these specific businesses. I remind you that you raised storm drainage fees in Littleton back in October by 25% because the communication said that you did not have enough money in your storm drainage fund to fund the projects that needed to be done. And yet here, you're approving a package where business is going in and not being required to put in the storm drainage facilities that are required because you say that it will be required by the government, either the city or some other government in the future. Well, if it's provided by the city, that's coming out of the storm drainage fund, which I pay fees into, which you raise fees because you said you didn't have enough money to handle your already projects. If it comes from some other governmental entity, it's going to be the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District that I pay property tax into. But the third reason is these incentive packages breed corruption, both at the staff and at the elected level. When you give out arbitrary amounts of money to arbitrary recipients based on criteria that's nebulous, you create the opportunity for corruption. You bring money-driven politics and special interest behavior from the national level and the state level down into the local level. When you, as a council and your staff, start picking some businesses as winners, some businesses to get the money jackpot from the government, and other businesses as losers, you create and encourage an opportunity where everybody is lobbying you to get your vote. And we all know that the way that they lobby in politics is through money. Because your vote now has a specific price tag. In this instance, it's somewhere north of $350,000. The trade-off for a potential business owner of spending some money on you or the staff to get back a whole bunch more money and economic incentives is a sound business decision. It's a truism of politics that's been in politics since the beginning of the time. Why? Why would you want to start going down the path of arbitrarily giving out money to some businesses and not money to other businesses when the program that you've had for more than 20 years has obviously proven successful by the information that you have from your own staff? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Susan?
Susan Bergsteiner, 6120 South Stern Parkway. I'm going to start by saying I'm for incentives, if they're used correctly. I'm going to read you a little definition, which I'm sure you know anyway, is an incentive is a payment or concession to stimulate greater output or investment. And, you know, from a strictly economic sales point of view, you guys have left money on the table. And if I was cutting a deal with anybody for any contract for any business, why would you give them money when they've already bought the thing? It makes no sense from a sales point of view. I understand that you want to encourage other businesses as good as these that are coming in, if not better. But the incentives need to be there for things that aren't desirable, like a certain plot of land that's going to have X amount of hazmat removals and you need to share it in order to get that business in. You know, things like that. I'm not sure exactly what, you know, these guys have told you they need these for if they already did the deal. So I'm very confused by the fact that you have perfectly wonderful deals coming to the table without any incentives, and yet you're reaching into our pockets, that means all of us, and handing over money that doesn't need to be handed over. I'm a little confused by that and would love to know more about what these guys are doing to deserve these incentives as well as what the payback ratio will be to the city over what point of time, because obviously return on investment has got to figure in here. This cannot just be, well, we really like these guys. So, I think there needs to be a little more information out there, and maybe it's out there and I haven't seen it, but I've been looking for it. So I'd like to encourage you to share the reasons and show us return on investment over what time period and what's going to happen with all this money in the meantime. I find it hard to believe that I'm agreeing with some of the people that have been up here talking, but on some of the points I really do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing no one else, we will move to our consent agenda. Consent agenda items can be adopted by a single motion. All ordinances must be read by title. Any consent agenda item may be removed at the request of council. Consent agenda item 7A is the application to rezone the property located at 2100 West Littleton Boulevard and 5759 South Bemis Street. This was originally scheduled for a public hearing before the Planning Board on May 13th, 2013. However, the applicant requested the hearing be continued to June 24th, 2013, and the Planning Board has accepted the applicant's request and continued the hearing. Since the public notice that was posted and published for the Planning Board hearing included notice of the City Council public hearing to be held on June 4th, staff is recommending that the Council continue their hearing to July 16, 2013. Jim?
I'd like to pull that, please.
It's pulled. 7B is a lease agreement. This is on the Saperchi property, which is just at the end of, what is the name of that?
Briarwood.
Briarwood. Thank you. Right to the south of Reynolds Landing, the Saperchi property, there's a home on that property. This lease would continue. Currently, the owner does live in that home, and this would continue her lease of that home through her natural life or 10 years, whichever is less.
I'd like to pull that, please.
Okay, that's pulled. And then we have a motion for the lease agreement for the parking lot at Skunk Hollow, which is a portion of the parking lot north of the Melting Pot Restaurants. The city has owned land there since 1990 and has leased it to the owners of the Melting Pot since, I believe, 1995. The new lease proposes a rent of $1,800 per year. Current rent's $50 per month, and any improvements to the parking area shall be paid by the building owner.
I'd like to pull that.
Okay, that's pulled. So going back to 7A, Councilmember Taylor.
Yes, the July 16th date is problematic. I will not be in town. A special meeting on either side of that date would work, but unless somebody wants to pay for me to come from Kalispell, Montana for that date, I won't be here.
It'd be August 6th.
Okay, you want to change it and make a motion?
Yes, I would move that the Broadstone at Littleton Station rezoning from B2 and R3 to PDR, 2100 West Littleton Boulevard, and 5759 South Bemis Street be continued to August 6, 2013.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second discussion. Bruce?
Well, I guess a question regarding Mr. Watson's issues concerning the timing process with respect to planning board. Does this fit the protocol, the legal requirements in terms of noticing?
I think it does. I'll be happy to look at that again, but when the planning board continued it, they're authorized by ordinance to continue it at the request of the applicant. And obviously you cannot hear it until you receive a recommendation from the planning board.
So then do we want to continue something we don't have a recommendation of?
Well,
No, I'm not saying you're not.
we'll get, once the planning board hears it, they'll either send a yay or a nay recommendation. So we're just getting it scheduled.
Right, it wouldn't be appropriately in front of you tonight because you don't have a recommendation from them.
I understand that part, yeah.
It's just scheduled on the calendar. So when the planning board sees it, then they'll move it.
Okay.
So we need to notice the public, and it is a rezone, so I don't know if we need to change information on the sign out there, but, okay. Jerry?
I watched the planning board meeting the night that this thing was continued. I don't recall any discussion being made. I need someone to tell me why it's being continued.
There was a request, a written request, formal request from the applicant to continue it, and we had posted both the planning board meeting and the city council meeting. And so when the planning board meeting rescheduled it for their date, we moved to the next appropriate timing between those two for the city council. And so that was originally going to be the July 16th date based upon when it was scheduled for planning board. Obviously, Councilmember Taylor has requested that we move it. We can't make it sooner than July 16th, so that's why I said August 6th. But it was at the request of the applicant.
So in the letter, the May 10 letter, they're asking more time to discuss amongst themselves, I guess, the plan?
Yeah, my understanding is they have resubmitted a modified plan based upon conversations with the neighborhood and in trying to address some of those concerns. And so staff has a modified plan that they will be taking, presenting in front of the planning board at their whatever meeting that was posted for.
And at the planning board meeting, there was no discussion as, it was just, okay, we'll accept it.
Correct. There was the request was to continue, and so the motion was to accept the continuance and move it to, I don't apologize, I don't have the date that they moved it to.
That's fine. Well, I would like to know more about it. Yeah, they want to discuss. I mean, there's been lots of conversation about this. I guess I'd like to hear from the applicant. Somebody needs to convince me why we need to change this. I mean, if the council doesn't agree with the planning commission on this, then what?
Well, at this point, you can't hear it because it hasn't gone through the appropriate process of the planning board yet. So it can't, there is no applicant here this evening, and it can't come before you this evening.
So we have no choice but to vote thumbs up, is what you're saying.
Well, you don't have to have a date continuance. What we're trying to do is schedule it so that we can get it posted and let the public know that this is when we anticipate that the city council will be hearing this, whatever the recommendation of the planning board is. Because we previously posted planning board and council together. So we're trying to keep that together so that we're informing the public. Here's when it's going to be in front of planning board, and then here's when you can expect to come before the city council.
Getting back to the planning board meeting, I watched that. I didn't think it was the meeting itself was administered correctly to allow for discussion. So I'm somewhat uncomfortable with this whole process.
I'd be happy to talk with you offline about and look at how that process went, and you could talk to the attorney as well about procedural matters on that. But here tonight, the request in front of you is to continue that to a time specific, again, so we can notify the public.
Thank you.
Whatever comes from it. You're welcome.
Bruce?
And just follow on to that, then the city attorney is going to review that to make sure the dates that were raised by the public comment, whether it was continued or postponed or 45 days or 60, the proper procedure was followed.
I will. This is the first I've heard about the 60-day objection. I will note that section, okay, thank you, 1019 specifically allows the planning board to grant a continuance at the request of the applicant. And so it is contemplated within your code that it's the applicant's application, they get to control that procedure. And if they're not ready to go forward, they get the opportunity to put forward the best application they can. So we allow them that opportunity to request a continuance if they're not ready to go. And so the application, obviously, you don't have jurisdiction to hear it because you haven't received a recommendation from the Planning Commission, so it isn't appropriately in front of you.
Other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to August 6th.
The vote is 6 in favor with Councilmember Valdez voting no. The motion carries.
Okay, item 7B, and that was pulled by Jim.
I just wanted to pull that so I can have an opportunity to vote no.
Okay.
I mean, on
Okay.
the consent agenda, normally, you can't vote no unless you vote no on all of them, so.
Yeah. Okay, need a motion? I really do need a motion.
Wait.
Do you want to read?
Madam Chairman, I move to approve the lease agreement with Barbara Saperchi for the residence at 6755 South Santa Fe Drive.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Bruce?
Sorry, who seconded?
Peggy or
Peggy.
me?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
give it to Peggy. Yeah, I guess okay, so you've picked my interest now. Would you care to elaborate, Jim, as to your reasoning for a no vote on this, out of curiosity?
I think when 5 years ago, Mrs. Saperchi received a substantial amount of money for her land, she had a 5-year date in which to relocate, and she has chosen not to and instead asked for an extension of the lease agreement. That is public property and is eventually going to be open space, and the sooner we move to removing all the out structures and buildings on that property and turn it to open space, I think the better. And I am not in favor of extending the lease for another 10 years or the life of the resident.
Any other discussion?
Question actually to Charlie. Charlie, can you give us rationale other than Barbara's emotional attachment to the space?
The original lease was signed in 2003, so it's 10 years. Mrs. Saperchi has lived in that house since the 1950s, so I guess there is some emotional attachment to it. She felt like she wanted to stay there longer. She has, of the 12 acres that we own south of Reynolds Landing, she has about 1 acre cordoned off for her personal use, and she is requesting an extension of the lease for another 10 years.
And then the question comes with her continued residence there, how is that impacting the master plan for the space?
Well, the Reynolds Landing portion, the 10 acres to the north, is complete. The south 12 acres, there is no master plan for that property. It's just, at this point, designated for open space. And there's nothing happening on the ground at all. It's just pasture land, plus her residence and a couple of outbuildings. There's no development plan by South Suburban or the city for the 12 acres that we own there.
Any other questions? Bruce?
Is she reimbursing the city back again for living there now?
She is paying a very nominal amount of rent for the 10 years.
Jerry?
Has she already been compensated then for that land?
Is she what?
Already been paid?
Oh, yes. The family was paid back in 2003 when we did a closing on the property. We own the land.
Thank you.
The city owns it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion to approve the lease agreement with Barbara Saperchi, and a second. Ready to vote?
The vote is 5 in favor with Councilmember Taylor and Councilmember Valdez voting no. The motion carries.
Okay. Item 7C, and I think that was pulled by Bruce. Okay.
It was. Would it be possible to put the overhead up that shows the overhead look of that plot on the Main Street area? Charlie, my only question is, I look at that piece that goes up behind Bradford Auto and is behind the second building and is used in their storage lot in the back. Is it correct in what I'm seeing there that that whole piece does go up into that area?
That's a good question, Councilman. This is a map from the county assessor's office, and our maps don't show that little extra piece. We don't show that at all as being city ownership. As a matter of fact, Bradford has a building on that site. And so we don't believe that the assessor's map is correct, but we printed this off the assessor's map just to show the parcel that the city owns. But that extra little crooked part there on the edge, we don't believe is city ownership.
My questions would have been city liability for operations on city land or whether we were renting it also. But it sounds like you feel that I think it's the fence line. I think he believes it's the fence line.
Yes, that's correct. That's what we believe is the fence line.
Okay, that was my only question.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, need a motion?
I move the lease agreement between the city and DLK Partnership for city-owned land on the east side of Santa Fe Drive be approved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Ready to vote?
The vote is unanimous. The motion carries.
Okay, so item 9A, moving to general business. This is adoption of a resolution approving the site development plan improvement agreement with Designs by Sundown and Breckenridge Brewery. Glenn, did you want to make a presentation?
Yes, ma'am. Let me get my presentation up, and I'll be right with you.
Okay. Yeah, just let us know.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I guess I'll bring you back to March 19th. That's when Council approved the I-1 zoning for the property. Let me just show you that real quick. However, you might remember that it was contingent upon the planned development overlay going into effect. As you might remember, the Planning Board has final approval over a planned development overlay. And that's the way we put restrictions on this property as far as the noise restrictions, some of the things that David Buck talked about earlier, the noise restrictions, setbacks, height restrictions, and use restrictions, all contained in a document like this, and that's what the Planning Board approved. And the zoning you approved is contingent upon this being recorded, and this has not been recorded, so actually, just to be technically accurate, so the zoning is not in place. And that's, in essence, to protect the landowner that currently owns it. If Designs by Sundown does not acquire the site and consequently sell half of it to Breckenridge Brewery, then they don't want the restrictions that they can only build a brewery and a landscape business on the site. So that's the current situation with the zoning. So since March 19th, a lot has been happening. There has been further site investigation, and I just mentioned this because one of the concerns raised is there might be contamination on the site, and indeed they have done a little bit more detailed investigation. They originally did a phase 1. There was enough concern that they went back in and did a more detailed phase 2 environmental study of the site, and that's to basically help make sure the people buying it know what they're buying. But that's an aside that really has to do with the real estate deal that's occurring. Part of the reason this has taken so long is I added up, were 5 attorneys that were involved in this agreement. We had certainly Kristen on our side worked on that, but we didn't have a city attorney, so we hired actually Jim New from a firm out of Glenwood Springs who has a lot of experience with development agreements. We also had Jay Camlett, who represented Breckenridge Brewery, and Dean Panos from Designs by Sundown, and then also Douglas Buck, who represented Meadowwood, was also involved in the agreement. And then on staff side, we certainly have the city manager's office, Kristen, Charlie Bloston, and I think 3 of his staff members weighed in on the agreement. So there's been a lot of eyes on this agreement, and we think we have a a good agreement that is fair to all and will really help bring Designs by Sundown and Breckenridge Brewery to Littleton. So what I'm going to do is kind of run through the physical requirements of the agreement as far as timing and how participation is going to work on those improvements. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, it's a long agreement, and I'm sorry for that, but we'll try and answer every question you might have. And I'll turn it over to the city manager, who will talk specifically about the proposed fee waivers and sales tax share back. So one of the first things in the agreement is sidewalk requirement along Santa Fe Drive. We don't have any sidewalks along Santa Fe. Technically, by our code, they would be required to put this in with the construction of their project. But however, it does create a bit of a hazard to have a segment that doesn't connect anything along this major arterial. They are still committed to doing it. We are actually deferring it. And the agreement does say if an improvement district is set up where we ask the adjacent landowners to participate in building that sidewalk, they will commit to participating in that. So that way, if the city comes in and decides, you know what, we do need to build a mile or more of sidewalk along Santa Fe, it can be done. And then also, I think they do have good access from a pedestrian standpoint with the Mary Carter Trail directly west of the site. So if we want to get access to this site, let's say somebody takes a light rail and they want to go see a movie at the Alamo Brew House and go up and see the brewery and take a tour, they can, it's an easy walk along the trail. So there is good pedestrian access to the site.
Glenn, a question on that.
Yes, Mayor.
So regarding that sidewalk, I mean, what you're looking at would be just specifically on that property, because it would be a sidewalk that stops and starts with, like, begins nowhere and ends nowhere, because there's no connectivity either way. So
correct.
Is that right? Okay.
Right. Part of the agreement talks about an access control plan, and that's utilizing a CDOT term, meaning the intersection with a major CDOT maintained roadway such as Santa Fe. So what this portion of the agreement requires is the developer shall install a traffic signal at this approved location. We estimate that to be a $225,000 improvement. They build the improvements to the intersection. And one of, I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of crazy intersection there now. We have two adjacent driveways. If you turn too quick, you're in the Meadowwood community, mobile home community. If you have to kind of go past that driveway if you want to go to the nursery or go to the Saperchis, for that matter. So this is really going to fix that intersection. Meadowwood folks have agreed to participate. They are dedicating 10 feet of additional right-of-way in order to create that ease of motion into the project. And they're also contributing to build that portion of roadway to the tune of $31,362. Now, the improvements that the developer is putting in for Meadowwood and the traffic light is subject to cost recovery, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, as how that's going to work.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
What's the total cost to put in a traffic light intersection and all the changes in the lanes and those kinds of things to make that whole total thing work?
As far as the total cost of this portion, what I can tell you is all of Briarwood, which would include the intersection but not the traffic light, it's $187,000. This is maybe a third of that, so I would say this segment is probably, I'm guessing $65,000 plus the traffic light of $225,000.
And that would include the changing of the lanes on Santa Fe and all those things in order to make that light work on Santa Fe?
Yes. Again, so the rest of Briarwood, the developer is dedicating this right away. They're putting in the improvements. Again, as I just mentioned, $187,495. And again, if, I'll talk about a little bit more detail, but if the Meadowwood property redevelops and is, it's right now it's zone B3, so it is zoned for heavy commercial use. If it develops for a commercial use, then they would be subject to cost recovery. They would have to pay a proportionate share back to the developer for being the pioneer in building this portion of Briarwood. And then there's this last segment, and this is the portion that actually ties into the Reynolds Landing parking area. Right now, it's not paved. The Meadowwood Corporation has agreed to dedicate that triangular piece that includes that future roadway and the little bit of triangular piece that's directly south of that. It's really unusable, but the Meadowwood Corporation has agreed to dedicate that at no cost to the city. The developer will actually do the construction of that roadway. However, the city is in this agreement agreeing to pay for that portion of the roadway to the tune of $35,438. Now, as we mentioned in the zoning case and in your staff report in the agreement, there's a 1996 drainage study that shows, and Charlie can correct me if I'm way off, but if Turtle Lake overflows as it's modeled, potentially stormwater would inundate a portion of this site and the Meadowwood Mobile Home Park. What the developer has agreed to do is dedicate a location for a future conveyance method to move that stormwater off of the Santa Fe frontage and ultimately get it to the Platte River. We think that that agreement, because it is so old, and since then there's been so many improvements that have been done between the lake and this location, and primarily it's the median that CDOT built, about a 4-foot concrete barrier that runs down the center line of Santa Fe Road. We think that water is diverted and that floodplain has changed considerably. We do expect that they're going to study it really rather soon, perhaps even start this year, so we'll know a bit more on that. But in the interim, what we have is the developer dedicating a 60-foot easement, and what that is a 40-foot permanent easement with a 10-foot construction easement on either side. So after we construct what would be probably a concrete culvert, those 10-foot temporary construction easements would go away, and we would have the 40-foot permanent easement in place. Construction of that drainage structure would be responsible, because it's a regional issue, either be borne by the city or another entity, and that could be the flood control district. Part of putting that in would mean it would disrupt the current driveway that the developer will put in. And as you can see, some of the parking actually encroaches into that area. Putting that back in place would be the sole responsibility of the developer. And then ultimately, after we build this structure, it would be maintained by the city or whoever that other entity is. So that's the drainage easement. And we certainly heard some concerns from the ETA property, and they are correct. CDOT said if you're going to put a traffic light in this location, to the extent possible, get as much traffic to it, and work with all the different property owners in order to get access to that site. And we believe that agreement does that. It does provide access to the traffic light for the ETA property. There are some concerns because we don't know what the ultimate development of the ETA property is. It's currently zoned RS, which is residential suburban agriculture. Ultimately, they would have to come before you to zone it, let's say, in conformance with the comprehensive plan, which would be like a light industrial use. And then you would get an opportunity to see where their access would be. The other physical constraint on the ETA property is it drops off drastically off Santa Fe. So because of those concerns. We don't know ultimately how it's going to develop. There's some great issues. The agreement actually says we're not going to set that location. We're going to set a reserve area of where access could go from the EDA property onto the Designs by Sundown property and ultimately cross the Breckenridge Brewery property and get access to the light. And that will occur at the time of map of dedication. That's when we would bring to the City Council a map that would show all the roadway, right-of-way dedications, and the drainage easement, and these reserve areas that would show how the EDA property would get access to the roadway. Yes, sir.
Glenn, if I could take a moment to talk about that. In the agreement, as you mentioned, it talks about vehicular access and sewers being ready to be hooked up to the IDA property, but I go down a couple more pages in the agreement when it talks about access easements and sanitary sewers. It says very specifically that the developer of the IDA property shall be responsible, and it goes down further, the developer of the IDA property shall pay. And so my concern is we have an agreement that's signed by the City of Littleton, by Sundown, and by Breckenridge that basically directs another private landowner what they will and will not do without their signature on the agreement. That's a problem to me.
Well, it's not unusual. Again, there will be access to the roadway and the sewer and the water. Basically what the agreement says that they will participate, the EDAs will participate in how they hook into those lines and help pay for those lines that the developer, again, as the pioneer for developing the property, has extended those sewer and water lines, electric lines, and the access roadway. So really the agreement says you shall basically pay your pro rata share of the cost that they've incurred bringing those utilities into the site. Right now, the EDAs don't have access to a traffic light, they don't have access to sewer, and they don't have access to water. It's a little bit different than the Meadowwood property that does have access to sewer and water. So that's why the two look uneven, I guess, if you compare the Meadowwood, their portion of the agreement, and the EDAs.
Well, it does look uneven to me. I'm still concerned that, and we did have Mr. Ida come in tonight. When I wrote these notes, I didn't know he'd be here, but I am concerned when three entities can direct a private property what they shall do. It may be that down the road during whatever land process there is, those requirements may come up, but I'm concerned when two private companies are directing a third private citizen how to use their property.
If I may, Councilmember Beckman, those are requirements on us to seek that from the EDA property if they ever were to develop. And the cost recovery specifically expires in 10 years. So if the EDA property doesn't choose to develop in the next 10 years, we would no longer have that requirement to try and seek, to use our best efforts to seek recovery from them.
Okay.
One thing I did want to mention is the security measures that I would say is a bit unusual. Again, the Designs by Sundown and Breckenridge Brewery are concerned that, as it was originally contemplated, the only access to the back of the brewery or into Designs by Sundown would be employees of those two organizations. Now, when we don't know what the ultimate development of the IDA property is, and we're allowing public access across those two sites, there is concern for the security. And there are provisions that we address the security measures on that new roadway when we know where it is. And then finally, as Kristen said, it would be subject to cost recovery.
Can you point on the map where you're saying there's a set aside for the possible access from the EDA property? Do you have where that is physically?
Let me go back and probably show it better right here. So there's two potential locations. One could be a shared driveway right here. And then somewhere they could get access to the main drive that would kind of is in the center of the site and comes out to, you see the little hand there, comes out to Briarwood.
Help me understand with the first one, if that were the access, at least as I'm looking at the roadways on here, the roadway that goes into Designs by Sundown actually goes into what I would say would be the visitor parking area for the Designs by Sundown property. And if I'm looking at the roadways correctly, it looks like the roadway that would connect to Briarwood would actually go across the, I'll call it the farm area, and would be into the public access that would go into Breckenridge. So the comment that I heard, and maybe I heard it incorrectly, Glenn, as to the access going into what would be expected to be employee side, I guess I don't see that.
One potential way, and I think they mentioned concern about gates. One potential way is again, there's a serious grade issue right here, but certainly they could gain access to this roadway, come up and around, and potentially gate it here so that nobody accessing the Eda property would necessarily get into the back end of Breckenridge Brewery or the main drive into Designs by Sundown. But it could be designed that we kind of segregate a public access roadway and keep and still keep their site secure.
I guess, I mean, when you look at it that way, it still looks like that road is the public access roadway into Sundown, Designs by Sundown.
This area right here? Yes, but we contemplated in the zoning. In fact, there's a note here, I can't read it, but it does show that it would allow access to the Eda property. It's right.
I understand that, but I guess
Okay.
I don't understand why a gate would be needed, because it looks like it's public access space.
Well, on the Designs by Sundowns, it looks like a public area, but my understanding is it's not really. They're not inviting the public into that area. It would be their customers that are part of their getting their project built and maybe are picking out plants. So it's not a general open to the public access. Move on. So paragraph M talks about cost recovery. How does the developer get paid back for a portion of these improvements? We talk a lot about pro rata share and how is that going to be calculated. As far as for Briarwood Avenue, and let's say the Meadowwood project develops in a retail center, they would do a traffic study and it would indicate that they would add X number of new trips onto the roadway, and then a pro rata share would be based on that. For sewer and water, it'd be based on projected demand or what they produced from the site. And as Kristen mentioned, the city acts as that center point of contact. So when the Eda property gets rezoned and does a site development plan, at that point we would enact the agreement. And it's only required for the redevelopment of the Meadowwood site. Currently, with their dedications and their $30,000 that they're putting in for the improvements, that guarantees access for the mobile home park. It's a public roadway. There wouldn't be any charges. It's only when they redevelop. And again, it would only be for the initial development of the EDA property. And as we mentioned, there's only a 10-year window on this. So if the Meadowwood Mobile Home Park stays that way for 10 years, fine. These requirements go away after that point. So with that, if you don't have any other questions, I'll turn it over to City Manager Penny. We'll talk about the fee sharing and sales tax sharing.
Well, I'm going to have some questions, but I'll wait till they get the presentation, then I'll make my comments.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Okay, let me step back just a little bit on this, just as a kind of a slight precursor to go global for just a minute. There are incentives of various types, both in the economic plan that the council adopted, but they're certainly commonly used within Colorado. The two primary ones are reduction of fees. I guess there's probably three common ones. Reduction of fees, grants, and sales tax sharebacks. And sales tax sharebacks go into, when you hear Urban Renewal Authority and TIF financing, those are essentially the same things. You have an incremental base of sales tax that's coming in, and what the community is doing is saying, we desire to have that business here. You're a retail generator in this example, and so we're going to share that portion of revenue that is the new and incremental increase over what we have been historically collecting. So first, it's commonplace. Inglewood did it fairly recently with the new King Supers that was in place, $500,000 in that sales tax shareback component. I'm not sure what they did on the plan review and permit side of it. In the larger context of when do you do this, it is somewhat arbitrary to the extent that we have relatively low, both in Colorado and certainly in Littleton, low why can't I think of it right now, property taxes. And so the property tax incremental increase is fairly minor in most cases, especially when you're looking at relatively an industrial piece of it. And so you're looking at plan review fees, you're looking at the grants opportunities, you're looking at the sales tax shareback or a property tax shareback for those communities that have a higher property tax. So in a residential situation, you may not really have an opportunity to offer an incentive because there's no new incremental money that's coming in by which you want to share back. And to the extent that you don't want to be in a deficit situation of losing money to bring whatever it is to the community, you're fairly limited in the sense that retail is where Colorado, good, bad, or indifferent, but that is where the local municipalities have received their money, is in retail. And so that tends to be where you see these incentives, if you will. The other primary one that we have are the grants. We have the downtown grant for the historic district, and when we have the outside of the downtown, and each of those have a $50,000 cap on them, and there's details within those about receiving those grants. And so in a retail situation such as this, and I'm going to generalize here for a few minutes, the developer typically wants to reduce their out-of-pocket costs. That's what if they can write smaller checks, that means they're borrowing less money, less payment on interest for the investors, whatever it might be. The local jurisdiction, in theory, wants to maximize the revenue that's coming in from permit fees and et cetera, because that's a known check that's coming in, because you don't know what's going to happen when that business 3 years from now. There's plenty of examples where a business comes in, they open, and they shut down, and they're gone. You also have public improvements that are made in this area. If you've got questions, jump in here, please. If you have questions.
Well, let me back up for 2 seconds. I mean, I mechanically understand what you're,
I was rewinding, sorry.
That's fine. What you're describing, the concepts are totally understand. And I don't want to necessarily, I think it's good that you're explaining them. I guess the one thing I'm sort of curious to hear is what I kind of understood or thought I understood was happening was that Breck had come in here and had an agreement in principle to acquire a piece of property. The key to sort of what you're saying vis-a-vis the comments that were made earlier is the timing of the transaction. If they've purchased the property with an expectation of moving forward, then the incentives we're discussing or you're describing are somewhat after the fact. But if they're still looking for the entire investment opportunity to coalesce and they haven't actually purchased the property that's been rezoned on their behalf, then I think the incentives remain in play as an inducement to get them to close the transaction.
So they have not closed on the property, and that's what Glenn was saying, is they haven't even filed on the rezone yet. So they have ample opportunity to walk away from the project, depending upon what their ultimate decision is.
And I understand what he said about the PDO not being filed, but let me clarify. They do not have title to that piece of property.
Closing will not occur until after they receive all the approvals for the city to build the project.
Okay, thank you.
And so, I mean, the developer is, Breckenridge Brewery is here tonight if you want to ask them that specific question. But they have, I believe, and I don't want to speak for them, but they have purposely have the closing post approvals for the council so that they know whether or not they want to close on that property. And I don't know what the deals of that are, but in a normal situation, they're going to have get out of jail clauses so that if they don't get the approvals from the city or wherever they're doing their development, they can walk from the project and they're not tied into that land. And so, no, these guys are in the process of getting their approvals. A lot of the development components in here and the details around the costs, the public infrastructure components, and does that play into what an incentive might, the value of that might be, aren't known early on because, as Glenn pointed out, we're working through that detailed engineering post the rezone because the investor or the developer, in this case Breckenridge, doesn't want to put in that money until they at least know that they have the rezone for it. So it's kind of an incremental. They're spending X amount of money, they get some approval, then they start spending some more money, and then they work their way down. But I'd be very surprised if the agreement, if the purchase agreement did not have an out if they don't receive approvals from the, in this case, the city.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So public improvements does play into it. What are the public improvements? What's the total cost that they're investing in this case? And these are all cost estimates, but in this case it's about $400,000, a little over, that Breckenridge is putting in public improvements for the city in terms of the light and the roadway. But getting back to the split, so it's our desire, and I'm going to be general and we'll talk about the specifics. It's our desire to get more money up front because that's a known check that we're going to receive. In this situation with a retail component that Breckenridge claims that they are going to make on their estimates in terms of taxable sales, therefore resulting in new tax generation for us, that's an unknown to us. It's all new money. What's coming in from that site right now in retail sales tax is zero. So we know that the incremental, the tax increment financing component, to use the TIF language, is all an increase. There is no out-of-pocket cost from the city in this situation. And so in trying to create a easy and fair first time kind of out of the gate agreement in here, because you are going to be having more and more retailers making this request. We've got at least one other there that's on the horizon that we thought we were going to get about 7 months ago. It's postponed now, but we hope to get it in front of you before too long. And it's a corporate one. But what we looked at was we estimated, based upon what we thought the construction costs coming from them were going to be, which was $175,000. And we said, okay, we'll split that with you, and we'll reduce the fee of $87,500. So instead of receiving a check for $175,000, what we're proposing to the council is we would receive a check of $87,500. That's the component that's a reduction in the out-of-pocket costs for the developer. That's what they want. The max incentive that we have proposed to you this evening is $300,000, which is that number on the right under the city rebate component. The remainder of that, of the $300,000, capping out at $300,000, we've said will come at a 50, we've proposed that it will come at a 50-50 split from the new sales tax that is generated. So, but for the development, the number is zero right now. So essentially two-thirds, over two-thirds of the incentive is coming from money that we are not receiving now and would be a share of the new proceeds that we're receiving back to them. So from my perspective, from a city perspective at least, I'll say mine, from a staff perspective, this ends up being more in our favor because we are continuing to get that larger check. We've reduced it some, but the burden is primarily on the developer to be productive in that sales tax generation. Because if they are not at the end of that year 4, so say for example, let me just finish, Bruce, and then. So say for example, they've proposed that they're going to bring in $120,000 a year. Say they only bring in $60,000 for the 4-year period, and we stick with the 50-50 split. That means they'd get $30,000 times 4 at $120,000 plus the 87. So their cap on their incentive would be $207,500. So it behooves them to be successful. We benefit from their success. They benefit from their success. But we've capped it at a dollar amount proposed, and we've capped it at a time duration proposed, so that either one of those, whichever comes first, that's the maximum amount that would be, in sense, rebated within the sales tax back to the developer. And so in terms of net increase to us, there is no negative number for us that continues to go up over a period of time. And if they're not as successful, as I said, they don't get as much. Yes, Bruce? And we don't get as much.
Well, while Glenn was, I guess while we were doing the consent agenda items, I tried to just very quickly on the calculator just answer the question the lady had about the return on investment. And if you discount the numbers back, I came up with about 2.5 discounted return on investment using a 5% interest rate. But the point I wanted to ask was, that's just money related to specifically the Breck property. Theoretically, one of the reasons for doing a project like this from the city's perspective is the ability of attracting people who would then use other amenities within the community, might spend dollars elsewhere, might go to Alamo for a movie, might go to Aspen Grove. Has anybody tried to frame the magnitude of incremental dollars or a multiplier of this kind of sales tax that might accrue to the community as a result of having this in place?
We have not, but your point has been discussed in terms of bringing additional people down here, but in trying to estimate what that ends up being and how many people are going to move back and forth, we've not. I believe the restaurant is a 200-seat restaurant. You know, what portion of those are going to go see a movie afterward or go downtown and wander and make some purchases? I mean, it's really anybody's guess.
Okay.
In that case.
But it's probably theoretically greater than zero.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And there's additional fees being paid. The Breckenridge in total fees are being paid, including, water tap fees and sewer tap fees, is about $1 million. Property tax will incrementally go up for whatever purchase. That's why this was intended to be, at least thoughtfully, a simple, straightforward share-back agreement with a portion, as I've said, with a portion supporting the developer in reduction of that out-of-pocket cost, and again, having the majority of the burden on them to be successful in terms of them meeting that ultimate goal of $300,000, which we, of course, want them to be successful. And so that trade-off between the reduced out-of-pocket cost for the developer and the share-back and the additional revenue obviously gives you an opportunity, if you want to shift those ratios around, you can give us some different direction. Because if you look at the agreement, the details of how this is collected and the minutia around it is a separate agreement. On an administrative level, how often do we pay them? Can they audit those numbers? The details that don't need to be within some of the minutia that's not within the overall agreement. But conceptually, as I've described it, and this is a simple one because the number is zero.
Barry.
Couple questions along this line then. The projection of sales revenue to the city, then where would that place Breck as far as collections within other establishments?
I can't answer that, and unfortunately Doug is out of town, so we could certainly get you that information, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
I mean, is it in the middle? Do we have any clue at all?
I do not. Doug could probably tell you off the top of his head, but top of his head.
The other part, now if projections or sales projections for BREC turned out that they're a lot, the actuals are a lot higher than the projections, how does that affect the percentage?
Well, there's two ways you could handle it. I mean, one, what I've put in front of you is just a up to 300,000 with no cap on an individual year. You could, throwing out an example, you could say, Breckenridge, you proposed 120,000. You've committed to us that this is what you believe you're going to bring in taxable sales in a given year is 120,000. We will split the first 120 with you. If there's anything above that, we will keep that, and that commits you to essentially you Breckenridge to the 4-year model. You could also leave it wide open, and potentially, if they're wildly successful, it could be that 300 could be hit at a 2-year, 3-year mark instead of 4-year mark.
So what you just said then was that the 300, for instance, could be the cap, whether it takes 1 year or 5 years.
Yeah, I have proposed in negotiations with Breckenridge, 300,000 is the maximum incentive that they will receive. So the questions you're asking, Councilmember, is how do you want to split up those ratios between a given year? Because what if they're wildly successful and they bring in $400,000 in a given year, and we are at a 50-50 share, they're going to be paid back in a year and a half. Or the share back will be paid. I shouldn't say they're paid back, but that share back would occur in a year and a half.
Great. Thank you.
So it depends upon how you want to cap it. Do you want to get out from under that, if you will, sooner, and then and then realize the full potential of what that is? Do you not want to do it? It's really a level of partnership with the developer to say, what do you feel is fair and appropriate based upon the projections that they've given us?
And you said Doug's out of town, is that?
That is correct.
Is his assistant also out of town?
Yeah, the world is in their their GFOA conference right now. So, but if there's questions, we can certainly email them, and they can do their best to get something back to you tomorrow. So, if you want to know where they kind of fit within.
I would like to know where they would fit.
Okay, yeah, happy to get that. Off the top of my head, just relating to one other one that we've looked at, this is probably on a lower end of a larger retail player of it.
Like a Home Depot?
So, no, substantially less than a Home Depot, but more of a mid-size box grocery type usage. You're probably looking at a small end of that.
That gives me an idea.
I'll confirm it with you.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Bruce?
Just bouncing around this chart that's on the screen there, where are sewer and water tap fees reflected in this?
They are not.
How would they impact city revenues?
I'm not sure I understand the question. We're estimating that Breckenridge, the project total, including design by Sundown, sewer tap fees estimated at $120,000. That's an enterprise fund, so it's going right in there. And then the water is obviously provided by Denver Water, so they would pay roughly $330,000 in water tap fees. And then we would collect, you want me to keep going on other fees they're paying?
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to know that there's some other money in this.
So as I said, the total fees that are within the Breckenridge realm are about $1 million. I'm sorry, in both of them are about $1 million. There's building plan, permit, and plan review at about $100,000. Went through water tap and sewer tap fees. Construction use tax, about $180,000. Equipment, that's for buildings and equipment, is $170,000. That's for BREC alone. I understand they're buying their equipment in Germany, and part of their concern was taxes and tariffs and all kinds of fun stuff. And then Arapahoe County open space tax at about $14,000.
It would just be helpful to be able to see that whole picture, and we don't really in the communication.
I wrote on this, but we'd be happy to get it over to you. It's, as I said, it's $9 million total in those fees, and then the public improvements are about $480,000 that they are going to be putting in for those public improvements.
And you don't have a projected revenue sheet for Designs by Sundown. I know in the narrative it said that there would be, I think it was $13,000 of fee reduction for them, but there was no discussion of tax incentive or anything else that I'm aware of.
Correct. We're not, and I think it was actually half, where's he at? Sorry. It was half of that, the $7,500. So the only thing that we've proposed to the council on Design by Sundown is the fee reduction of $7,500. No other incentive, if you will.
Okay, and then the last question on this chart, it has the construction line, and then it has the year one line. What annual year could you attach to maybe the construction in year one?
Well, and that's part of why we would have the detailed agreement about when does that actually start, because when they get through the approval, when they get their closings, when they get the property cleaned up, when they get their building permit approval, it could be 18 months to 2 years before they come out of when they're really ready to open. So we don't have those dates yet right now, so we'd have to define part of what does year one qualify. Obviously, if they open in an October time frame, they're not going to collect that total revenue. So there's some minutia within that agreement. So, and again, they're here if you want to ask them what their estimate is. I can't speak to that.
Bruce.
Just a quick clarification. My recollection is certainly the Denver water contract we did a couple years ago. The water tap fees come to the city. That's correct? You said Denver Water, but it's. I thought my understanding was just the sewer. So that 300 some odd thousand is going to. I thought on the incremental volumes we could negotiate tap fees with people.
We do nothing with water tap
All right.
fees.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Phil?
Yes. Big picture, deal's not done. The question is, what are the final pieces that we're doing as part of the deal ends up here? And there's about $1 million of fees that they're putting in place, about $480,000 of improvements in addition to that. That's not counting building their facility and putting all the equipment in. So I think that's all right. To better look at the city's return, rather than starting with a 50-50 rebate, I'd like to look at where the city holds on to maybe the first 50,000, and then we share above that. That way the city has kind of a set revenue flow that we're not sharing to begin with. And we are hoping that, and we will be working with them to see tremendous success. We have a great interest in that, but that kind of puts that little onus on them to make sure they're coming out of the door well, and helps us on that front, and would like to see something like that. Now, you mentioned that that's administrative agreement. Is that something we need to exactly include now, or?
I think the more specific you can be in that, and then the intent of that separate agreement is more, when does it start, how do we collect or refund those fees? So, yes, if you could be more specific, do you want 40, do you want 50, and are we talking about a 50-50 split above that number? So if you want to say it's 50,000, and then we'll share everything above that. I assume there's no change in the cap, unless.
No change in the cap.
Okay. So 50,000 a year, share 50-50 above that?
Yes.
So how much further would that pull it out
Well,
on
you're
your
looking,
300?
if you take a base out of 120, hold on one sec. 120 leaves you 70, it's 35. 35 times 4, 7.
And I have another
I
question.
got about 6.5 years, but that's mad math without our financier and his calculator.
Or 300,000.
Yeah. So you got 87.5 in the permit fee reduction, and if you end up, maybe it's 7. Yeah, you're going to be at 6 point. at 6.5 because it's about 215,000 roughly in the sales tax share back, and if you're looking at minimum of 35,000 a year, that would be about 6.5 years to get up to the 215 plus this 87. So 6.5 years, Mayor.
And it's just we're getting more shares sooner. I understand that. So, and would like to see that. And then the second piece, question, 2 lines are on this particular projected revenue sheet. Shows Breckenridge projection and the City of Littleton projection, and those numbers are the same. We know the basis for those assumptions.
It basically was, no, the numbers come from Breckenridge, and so when I gave it to finance, they had no reason to not, they didn't, obviously there's no inflationary factor built into this, there's no revenue growth as Breckenridge becomes more successful. The intent here is to take the most conservative number that Breckenridge gave us. The answer to your question, Councilmember, is that is based on a Breckenridge sales tax generation number. And I had asked finance if they had any other criteria they would look at it, but since we don't have a brewery in town, we just matched what their revenue is. We're using this general template for looking at these in other areas, so that's a standard row that we have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other, Jim, I'm sorry.
I'm going to disagree with Councilman Cernanek. I think the figures on the left are talking about the splitting of the fees, and the rest of the revenue comes into a maximum of $300,000, regardless of how fast they make their sales. So it could be above or below $60,000, but if you calculate it on half the sales coming into the city, it's so much easier to calculate than it is to go through some kind of machinations to come up with a figure in order to get to that $300,000 regardless of the years. So keeping it simple, we've got a set figure of $87.5 and another set figure of $300,000 after they start producing revenue, and when they reach that maximum, then everything after that is ours.
And I think I'm clear on this, but the 300 is inclusive of the fee reduction. So it's not on the sales tax. That is the cumulative, the grand total that has been requested. And that is a request, obviously, and this whole thing is a negotiation. And you have
$212.5 coming from the sales tax.
Correct.
Any other questions for Michael? Okay.
Is there general?
Oh, Jerry does.
I have one. Why wasn't this information brought to us when we first heard this?
Well, as part of the rezone, we didn't have the numbers for some of the improvements and context for what the maximum would be. And in talking with the staff, it's not part of the rezone discussion. There certainly was an opportunity to have, and I've talked to a couple of you independently, of how do we have this conversation so that there's earlier awareness of this, so that if you guys, to Councilman Cernanek's comment, if there's a directive that you want to go in a ratio and a decision that you have earlier opportunity to provide input in it, and we're committed to doing that in the future and getting more in front of it than this one did. So a lot of these issues that you heard tonight, we have been, we didn't mention CDOT was part of this conversation. I mean, there's just been a lot of moving pieces in it. So do apologize for it coming in this way. It's not the cleanest way to get it in front of you. It's probably, it's a tough thing to negotiate. It's tougher when you don't know what the project actually is and what some of those estimated costs are, and even what sales tax generation is. It wasn't until after the rezone and conversation with the council that we even got the final numbers from Breckenridge in terms of what the sales tax generation was going to be. So it would have been hard to come in with a proposal for you. But to the extent that there's earlier awareness and at least an opportunity, even if we don't have firm numbers in those spots, we're committed to bringing that for you too. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Understand the conversations about the permit fees or the fees and the sales tax share back, but the other item that's in here under page 2, I guess, of the, no, what is this, of the site development plan improvement agreement, we're also waiving the public facility fee, i.e. the impact fee.
Correct.
And so that's, now, and obviously that doesn't, it's in process, it's going to happen, and that's fine. But do you have an order of magnitude in terms of an expectation of what that fee might be for a project of this nature?
We've met with the consultant once. He's still in the process of collecting the new capital projects costs from us. And I think what we're going to see is a significant reduction in the commercial and a significant increase in the residential.
Which would theoretically make sense given the public services involved.
And to what magnitude is, it's too early. We don't have any preliminary numbers for you, but definitely a reduction and an increase in that capacity for it.
All right, but you don't have any bigger than a bread box kind of number range, 5,000, 10,000, nothing?
I do not.
Okay.
No. I could do it more on the residential side, but on the commercial side,
understand.
That one's going to be more complicated. The residential is definitely cleaner in looking at it, and we're trying to figure out how do we break in different types of uses. Do we want to propose to you that there's different uses that have different impacts? This particular project, because it opens onto Santa Fe, which is a state highway system, they're putting in the roadway improvements in the street, and a lot of what the impact is going to be traffic flow north and south. It's going to be, not to pass the buck to CDOT, but a lot of those significant impacts and roadway impacts are going to be CDOT's issue.
Okay.
Jerry?
And this is for Glenn, I think. You had mentioned that on the Ada property.
What's the correct pronunciation?
I believe they say Ida.
Jim?
Ida property. They weren't a part of the discussion, evidently, on, I guess, the sidewalks and all that good stuff. And you had mentioned that they would be asked to participate. Is that where you were?
They would be required to participate if they access those utilities or the access road to the traffic light. It would be a requirement.
Well, you said something, they would be asked to participate. And
I'm not sure.
Okay, so then what would be their share at this point?
Well, again, it's hard to know because we don't know what the cost of that driveway is going to be or its location. And we don't know what the traffic generation of a future EDA use is going to be. So it's going to be very hard to calculate what that might be at this point.
Give me a rough guess. Any idea at all? I mean, come on, you're an estimator. I do estimate all the time. You must have some sort of an idea.
I have no idea. What you've seen is the actual total cost of the improvements, but again, their share is based on how much traffic they're adding to it. Well, that could be 50 to 2,000 cars a day, and it's a very tough, there's too many variables to be able to figure that out now.
Are we talking $100,000, $200,000?
So the total improvements at that site are $480,000.
Yes.
And so there's a pro rata share for at least the traffic signal plus a portion of that roadway. So if you, and I'm just going to, these are ballpark numbers, but if you assume that that roadway is significantly cheaper than a full built-out road, and Charlie can jump in here if I'm not articulating this correctly, that is, for example, on our pro rata share on Briarwood Avenue, it's $35,000, and we have, I think, like a 6% share. I could be wrong. We have a small percentage because of Reynolds Landing, and we're not paying anything into the traffic light portion of it. So if you think about just that pro rata share on a roadway system, maybe it's $35,000 of a portion of whatever that is. But part of the issue that you're hearing here and why this is being proposed, that the burden is on us to go and collect from the developer when and if they develop, is there's no plan for that site. If we could lock in that location and we knew what that location was going to be and how it was going to be tied in, it could be built today, they would be party, to answer Councilman Beckman's question, they would be party to the agreement because they would actually be participating and writing a check today. But obviously we don't want to build a roadway that goes into the wrong location, because when that property either gets sold or developed, depending upon what happens, and it gets, the developer who buys it comes in and says, well, that's right where I wanted to stick an X, and then you're redesigning that entire roadway. So the challenge here is, how do you ensure that they have an opportunity to connect, but at the same time not restrict or prohibit the development of the future, whoever buys that, to be developed in the most appropriate manner. And so that's, I mean, the trade-off for Breckenridge and Designed by Sundowns is there's a 10-year window in here. So whether it's Meadowwood or whether it's the property on the south, because I'm going to get the name wrong, and now that you guys just said it. Ida. I knew I would have gotten it. If they wait 10 years, which I think, I don't want to speak for David Buck, but I think they're pretty happy having the mobile home park there, they don't have to pay anything after that 10-year window. And so that's that trade-off of the unknown that's in there. So we're pulling numbers out of the hat.
But you threw out a number of 35, so it's not...
I'm just using that on our portion. So we have a small number of vehicles that are accessing Reynolds Landing based upon traffic counts. The roadway is about $260,000. I'm doing my math here, and of that, we're paying $35,000 for that stretch. So you got to take kind of that stretch, our traffic count, and go, okay, this is more of an access road that's coming down here. You know, that's what we're talking about. But it'll be based on traffic flow, which is based upon the use. If it's an expansion of...
You give me a ballpark, and that
Michael's,
sounds good. Thanks.
Then you bet.
Other questions? Jim?
Yes, Lynn, I have a question on page 40 of our packet, which was page 5 of the agreement, having to do with vehicular access. It states in there that there's a 20-foot wide access if applicable regulations of CDOT or the Littleton Fire Department require a wider easement. My question is, I can understand a little bit about Littleton Fire Department, but what does CDOT have anything at all to do with regulations on a piece of private property when it is not public roadway? Why is CDOT involved?
Right, and it would be a driveway on private property. If it happened to be, the only reason I would think CDOT would be concerned is if it's a portion that's actually in the CDOT right-of-way, and that would be at that exit or access point on the south end of the DBS site that comes directly in. If they want a wider driveway there, that would be the only portion that they would have a say on. You're right.
Councilman Taylor, Glenn is right. If it's within their right-of-way, they can control it. CDOT access code also addresses roads that access their highways. And in this particular case, for example, Briarwood, they will review the design of Briarwood Avenue for several hundred feet west of Santa Fe, as they don't want cars coming in or out of Santa Fe to be jammed up. So they do have control or review over that particular design.
Well, see, that brings me to my second question. I think this agreement is bending over backwards to help the Ida people, and because they have a right-in, right-out. We've got lots of properties on the west side of Santa Fe that has only a right-in, right-out. Gary Sutton property, for example, where he's got these huge semi-truckloads of hay coming in and out. He's got right-in, right-out only. I don't see why we had to give special consideration to this piece of property. I don't think CDOT has any regulations about this, and I would like to see that part removed from the agreement, that CDOT can control how wide that access is going to be. And unless somebody can give me a good reason as to why it is, when you look at the map of the CDOT ownership, I don't think that roadway is in CDOT ownership or right-of-way.
Well, their right-of-way extends beyond the limits of the road.
I understand that, and I saw the map on that. I do not believe it gets down to that access road that is on this map showing getting into the Eda property.
Glenn, earlier you mentioned that to put that light there, that CDOT required access. Or I thought that's what you said, that CDOT required that the Eda
Access plan?
So is it the light that's triggering this? Okay.
No, this paragraph is really relating to the driveways on the site, on the private property. The only exception I could see that CDOT would have a say is in this southernmost driveway at this location that'll cross CDOT right away in order to get access to Santa Fe.
They have that right now. That exists now. We're not changing anything with that if they continue to have that right in, right out only. That's not changed.
We could certainly remove CDOT from the agreement. I mean, ultimately, they would have review where there's access onto the roadway, onto their roadway.
If I may, I mean, part of this is, it would behoove us, I think, depending upon what that use is to funnel as many vehicles as possible into that light to gain the most access possible. And so what we've tried to do, as I stated earlier, is create a situation where we do the best to anticipate and recover those costs for those who have to put in the roadway now and put in that infrastructure now. But to the extent that we can really get that property up there, we have a greater opportunity for better development, easier access. It's not just right in, right out, but you have essentially full movement access, even if it's not the cleanest because you're driving through something. So I understand the concern about bending over backwards, and I believe the language CDOT gave us was to the greatest extent possible to accommodate, and so we're trying to balance that out again.
Assuming that that stays in here, because I don't think there's 4 votes up here to remove CDOT out of this agreement, but assuming that stays there, can we require that the southern access of an exit out of the Eda property be eliminated? So everybody has to use the traffic light, regardless of which direction they want to go.
You might have to talk to CDOT and fire on that, too, for emergency. I mean, you can always probably have a breakaway or something, but I don't know if we can answer that off the top.
Well, and Charlie certainly works with CDOT more, but I believe if the Eda property does develop and they utilize the traffic light and this other driveway, I believe they will make the requirement that their particular driveway that exists today into the Eda property would go away.
Yes, I would vote to not allow that if possible, because they are getting access to the traffic light. And as I said, I think this agreement bends over backwards to help the Edas.
Anything
My
else?
second
Okay, go ahead.
question goes to page 43.
What page of the agreement is that?
That would be page 8 of the agreement.
Okay.
Item number M. You've got in there 10 years. Can you give me a justification for 10 years? It seems to me that regardless of what number of years it is, there is a benefit to both the Meadowood and to the Edas, for regardless of how many years it takes for that property to develop. There is a benefit to them. And why are we limiting this to 10 years?
I'm not quite sure how we arrived at 10 years. I mean, ultimately, from the Briarwood standpoint, that is a public street. And if it's primarily going to be utilized by Breckenridge Brewery for 10 years, then it becomes a public street and there's open access to it. Now, the 10 years, certainly, if the Edas 10 years later want access to the sewer, then it's a new agreement, basically. They still have to cross private property in order to get to the light. So that's basically, this deal is in place for 10 years because, as Michael mentioned, that's what we know now. We don't know the ultimate use of the Eda property, and it could change.
That's my point. We don't know what's going to happen. So why are we putting a limitation in there that eliminates our ability to do something after 10 years? I don't think that's right. And frankly, Council, I'm going to make a motion on number M on page, whatever it is, 8 of this agreement to eliminate the 10 years on cost recovery.
Is that a motion?
Yes, it is.
I'll second it.
We don't have.
Well, we probably ought to get a motion to approve and then use amendments on these changes. Kristen?
I've just always seen some sort of limitation on cost recovery, and I'm not sure of the legality of just a recovery that goes on forever. So I would advise that we maybe extend it to 20 years, but not that we just leave it open-ended for forever.
In terms
the
of
cost that I'm thinking that they put in those improvements, but eventually they're used and I'm thinking of the financial
Had to be
term there.
redeveloped. Then I will change the motion with jury's.
Appreciate to.
Well, my question is on protocol. We don't have a motion currently on the table, so it would the preference be we make once we get a motion on this agreement, then we would make those amendments. Those as amendments?
I'll catch up with you, yes. I would make a motion and then a motion.
Do we need to withdraw the second and the motion?
Yes.
They were made. Wendy? We
It's
do?
likely out of order. More likely out of order because you don't have a main motion.
Okay, we'll just call it out of order, move on. Do you want to change it to 20 years, Jim?
Well, go ahead and get your motion for adopting the agreement, and then I'll
Okay.
make my amendment.
Okay. Do we have some more questions before a motion? Bruce?
Going back to the drainage on agreement, section J, page 7, and this, Charlie, this might be a question for you. It talks about whether or not any drainage improvements are ever constructed upon the drainage easement. If drainage improvements are ever constructed off-site for any of the purposes for which the easement was granted, then the developer shall have no obligation to contribute towards the cost of the off-site improvements. I guess that sort of makes sense since they're off-site improvements. I'm curious why we stipulated that in here. And maybe the other way to ask it is there nothing we can conceive of where we would do something off-site utilizing the easement that would be of subsequent benefit to Breckenridge and Designs by Sundown, such where it would theoretically make sense for them to participate? I don't have a major problem with it, but it's so expansive, it strikes me as I'm curious why we're sort of stating it this way, and as I said.
You asked me to see if I can conceive of some way that.
All right, let me say it this way.
I don't think I can.
What was the logic for basically saying that under no circumstances whatsoever do they ever have to participate in anything other than the drainage easement?
Well, they are participating in their own drainage. They're managing their own drainage on site. What they are not doing is managing the drainage that is coming from uphill through their property to the city property and then to the river. But they have to take care of their drainage on site for their own property.
And I agree with that, but why do we need to state or stipulate that they don't have to pay for anything that's not on their property? It seems.
Mr. Councilmember Stallman, I think, and Glenn can jump in here too, is that the negotiation was that the dedication of the easement itself through the property was their contribution to that, and we wouldn't then seek additional contributions.
But is there, if that contribution, if that wasn't, I think, I mean, I understand that piece of information, but if they hadn't done that, we wouldn't be thinking of charging them for something upstream, would we?
Potentially, Councilmember, you could have a district that's set up like an improvement district to solve the drainage, where they would then be asked to
Is that what you
provide
guys were going
participation.
for?
Yeah, and in this case, Kristen's exactly right. They're dedicating 60 feet across the center of their property.
Right.
That should be their portion of the contribution. And
I don't have a, okay, and I think that explanation works. I didn't understand their contribution, I understand. The other attribute of it, I was trying to figure out how that could even occur. So I think that you may have addressed it there even. It sounds like it might be a remote thing, given it's in the city. But, okay, thank you.
Bruce.
Glenn, just one more clarification in the communication. In the designs by sundown portion on page 2 of the communication, you mentioned that they would anticipate 45 new jobs working out of those offices in the Littleton area. Above it, you discussed Breckenridge Brewery, but there's no discussion there of jobs. Do we have a number of jobs that would be associated there?
yeah, I believe they were projecting 25 to 50, I believe, was the number of employees with the brewery. 75.
That would be the restaurant and any retail sales and then the factory itself.
Right.
That's brewery alone. That's brewery alone. Restaurant staff would be another 25, 40 people.
Okay. So 100, potentially another 100 jobs there.
That's why I shouldn't guess numbers.
Jobs, 75. Net new, coming, adding from them, 75.
Okay, from the audience there, net new 75.
Any other questions? I have a question, Glenn. When this, when the rezone came before us and the drainage was also discussed at that point, and you guys said you had to bring back this agreement, one of my comments was that urban drainage needed to get looped into this, my opinion. And part of the reason for that is because they're able to design and construct drainage system that is friendly to open space and the river and also to development. So I don't see where they got looped in on this at all. It seems like the drainage continues to be somewhat of an issue as to exactly, I mean, you're getting some of the big pieces taken care of, easements and stuff like that. But is there a reason they haven't been brought in, and can we expect that they could at least be part of working towards a solution with this?
Yes. In fact, I think the Public Works Director, Charlie, has had discussions with them since this project's been up. And I believe they have actually moved up the update of this study in order to get us an answer much quicker than when we first started the zoning. So we have had discussions with urban drainage.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Council? Okay, seeing none, I need a motion.
I move that the City Council adopt Resolution 13-17, approving the Site Development Plan Improvement Agreement with DSD LLC and Breckenridge Wincoop LLC, subject to final review and approval by the City Attorney.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And Jim?
Yes, I'd like to offer an amendment, and this is on page 8. Item number M of the agreement on cost recovery. And the second line, it talks about recovering from neighboring property owners for 10 years. I'd like to change that to 25, and my motion would be to change 10 to 25, and I'll justify it after a second.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to change 10 years to 25 years under letter M.
I think,
Jim?
I think 25 years is a more reasonable date if you've got to have a time limit on there. The life of some of the paving and other infrastructure that's there, 25 years would be looking at doing some upgrades or replacements, and so I think that's a more appropriate number.
I have a question on that.
Jerry?
So, for the city manager. So whether it's 10 years or 25 years, how is that as far as managing?
Well, that's...
For 10 years, I can guess there's going to be some people still here.
Well, luckily...
25 years, I'm thinking, other than Charlie, there won't be anybody else there.
Yeah, Charlie will still be here, and he'll
Yes, he
remember
will.
it. So unlimited to if Councilman Taylor would have done that. I mean, so right now what we can do is with technology we can attach this agreement to that parcel so that when that parcel comes up, if we all, to use Councilman Coles, if we get hit by a bus this afternoon, when that parcel comes up, this agreement can be attached to that and they'll see it. So there is an administrative component because you have to read the agreement and look at it, but technology does afford us an advantage that we haven't had in the past.
I think what I'm learning here is not to take a bus with Peggy.
I'll leave that up to you.
Any other questions on the amendment?
Yeah, so I just want to ask about that. If it's 25 years with inflation, what the devil is the cost recovery going to be at that point? That doesn't make sense to me. So, sorry. I understand the theory, but...
Well, again, keep in mind, I mean, what Councilman Taylor has proposed is an outer term for the redevelopment. So the question, to an extent that you're asking yourselves, is do you think those parcels are going to redevelop within the next 25 years?
And it's a cost recovery upon the initial investment that they've made to construct it.
I know, that's what I'm saying, but the initial cost after 25 years is going to be really low. So why go to the hassle of keeping track of all of that?
And I think that's what Kristen was saying, is that depreciation on that raises some questions. I think the norm is probably 20 years that you typically normally see. But again, the question is, do you think that those are going to, what you're trying to do is, I mean, the people who are interested in this are the people who are making the initial investment. They're the ones who are paying attention right now to say, how long are you going to give the city to keep an eye out to recoup that money for their investment? And to the extent that you believe it'll be developed within the next X years, in this case 25 years, we will keep our eye out for them on their behalf to the extent that we can recover it.
Bill?
Yeah, I think I have a different view, and I want to know whether I'm wrong in this. As I read the agreement, what it does is it sets the cost recovery level and a formula for 10 years. At the expiration of those 10 years, then if there is a development on the IDA property, they would actually have to negotiate with the private property owners to go across. And to extend this period of time actually penalizes, I think, in my view, the design by sundown and the breweries to lock them into a cost recovery on initial investment, and as opposed to having the opportunity to negotiate something possibly different or looking at a different level of access. And so unless I need to be corrected on that, my vote's going to be no.
Any other questions or comments on the amendment? Okay, we have an amendment to change item M from 10 years to 25 years. Ready to vote?
The motion fails. Councilmember Taylor voted yes. Everybody else voted no.
Okay, we have any other amendments?
One.
Bill?
On the shareback component that's illustrated in Exhibit 1, I would like to see the city receive the first $40,000 and then a 50% share after that, and we can extend the period for 6 years given that amount. So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to extend what he said.
Clarification then, so the 50% is going to be for 5 years after the first year.
It'll be six.
Well, sorry,
The amendment said 6 years.
The 40 is going to be first to the city, the sales tax amount. And I have a comment.
So wait, clarify that for me one more time, if you will.
In other words, the first $40,000 of sales tax revenue to the city comes to the city, and then there's a 50-50 share for sales tax generated each year.
And the 40 is only the first year?
No,
It's each year.
It's each year.
Okay, gotcha. And then whatever's left over, that's the 50% share.
Right, and we extend the period to 6 years.
Okay, thank you.
The calendars.
Bill, did you want to say something else?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I appreciate Jim's remark because I don't want to make things terrifically complicated. However, this is a rebate component that's calculated at the end of a tax year, and you're going to be looking at all the revenue, and the formula is going to be all on one page, and I don't see any great complexity in a sheet with that calculation. It's not like they're doing it at the cash register every day.
Bruce?
I'm sorry, so you're not talking about the rebate of the fee up front. That's not what you're talking about in the 40,000?
No. It ends up being with a maximum of the $212,500 that would come from the taxes.
Sales tax.
Right.
Okay, but maybe I missed, the 40,000 front-end piece came from where?
I was trying to not make it too long a period of time, but have it be a little longer, but to see that the city gets a good chunk no matter what level.
If I may, just interject, having the spreadsheet, I would suggest that based upon the numbers you've proposed, that you could cap it at year 5.
Okay. Seconder, you take that as a friendly?
I do.
So it was 40K each year, 50%, the balance for a total of 5 years.
Capped at 5 years, or $212,500, whichever comes first.
Up to 500.
It's 50% of what?
Of the number above 40,000.
Up to the 120?
So the city would collect the first 40,000 in sales tax collected. The city would then share back 50% of the total that came in above that. And so based upon their revenue projections, that would occur at the very front end of year 5, based on $120,000 in sales tax projections a year. If we were really high-tech, I could show it to you on the screen. We'll work on that.
Can you give us an idea of what that would look like each year?
Yes, I can. That would result in... maybe I can't.
40, 80. We'd get 80.
So we would end up with about 70,000 based on $170,000 a year, and then they would get 50,000 a year running out to that 212. So 70,000 annually.
So it adds an extra 10,000 a year.
It's actually 80.
Yeah, I think it's 80. I mean, 40 leaves 80 split 50-50 is 40 to us, 40 to them. So we get 80, they get 40, the way this is set up.
Regardless of the amount of change that it is, if we follow what his amendment, and if it passes, you can calculate what that's going to be.
I hear you.
Okay, we have any other discussion on that amendment? Okay, the amendment is to go with 40,000 a year automatically to the city and then split the 50-50 above that with a cap of 5 years. Ready to vote?
Peggy? The vote is 4 in favor with Councilmember Taylor, Councilmember Stallman, and Mayor Brinkman voting no. The motion carries.
Any other amendments? Okay, we have a motion on the table. Get to it. We have a motion and a second to approve the site development plan improvement agreement with Designs by Sundown and Breckenridge Brewery. Any discussion? Bruce?
Well, I can, sure. Sorry.
What was that about?
I was just trying to get in the queue. I thought I'm usually further down the queue, so that's fine.
I'll get you out of the way.
That makes good sense. I'm going to support this. The economic plan that we did approve last week, or a couple weeks ago, is a culmination of a lot of input over an extended period of time, is on point with this project in a lot of ways. It talks about attracting new businesses that offer new employment opportunities and new sources of revenue, identifying and improving undeveloped and underdeveloped properties along major corridors, and pretty clearly this property has a lot of issues, the drainage not being, the least of which, but certainly traffic flow and so forth. Developing and recognize and capitalize on strategic relationships and partnerships that make Littleton a great community, in a lot of respects, in my opinion, is really the key to this thing. What we're really doing here, in my opinion, is not, quote unquote, spending taxpayer money. What we are doing is making an investment and in developing the brand that is the city of Littleton and partnering with a world-class private entity that will bring value to us in a lot of different ways broadly throughout the community beyond just the sales tax revenue we're going to see as a result of the agreement. In reality, another piece of what was in the economic plan talked about citizen and business survey priorities, including creating incentive for business investment, strategic revitalization along major corridors, and diversification of revenue streams, and expansion of employment opportunities, all of which are included in this arrangement. The key to the whole thing is that this is not a done deal. If Breckenridge, the way this has worked is the proposal to proceed is contingent upon what we are doing, the opportunity to proceed on what we would believe, and I think is a great site for this particular project, may work, but businesses are going to make decisions on, in respect of cash flow economics. I mean, that's the way these things work in terms of how people allocate scarce capital. And therefore, a great site, which we believe exists in and around Littleton, and this particular site, but one that potentially has a high cost structure to it, might not be as attractive as a less desirable site with a lower cost structure. Now, I don't know, obviously, what other sites have been considered, but this represents our skin in the game in contributing to an outstanding public-private partnership, and I think in a lot of ways it's not inconsistent with something like an Aspen Grove Business Improvement District, where people pay a little bit more, where there's advantages broadly to the community beyond just the value. Clearly, that is a win-win proposition with the private investors as well as the citizens, as well as the city, in terms of providing sufficient revenue to continue to offer high-quality services. I think we continue to look at making strategic investments in the community. We've done it over a long period of time. There is citizen return, just like there's shareholder return on a good corporate investment. And for those reasons, I'm going to vote yes on this resolution.
Yeah, I think everything that we talked about that was good about this project the first time around we had the discussion and the public hearing, I think is absolutely still true. We're talking about two businesses with complementary development along the river corridor, as well as fronting to Santa Fe in an appropriate fashion. And echo, although I try to be a little bit briefer than my council member partner, Mr. Stallman, but I see this as still a good item and attractive for the city.
Bruce?
I have a couple comments. You know, there's really two issues in front of us tonight, and but we only are voting on really one piece of it. And the problem is, if there is a problem with one of the issues that we're talking about, it shouldn't be a reason to vote against the other. Breckenridge Brewery is a fine business. It really does fit into the space that's available there along Santa Fe. It's definitely something that would be interesting to the citizens of Littleton. It fits into the plans for trying to economically develop the river corridor in Santa Fe. So there's a lot of reasons why it fits. And in addition, they have a backyard there where literally millions of dollars of tax money have been spent, and they are an organization and a business that will help protect that kind of investment. So I think that's issue number one. But I really wish that I had had more time personally to look at this. I got it Friday, and here we are Tuesday. The public never really had a chance to see it at all, and we talk about being open and accessible and transparent. And this is the first time an issue of this magnitude in economic development has come across through Littleton in a number of years. And it's new and different, and it's based on, as was mentioned tonight, a new economic plan. So it really did deserve more of a look by the public, and that's one of the problems. I did some research today, and I found that there's some communities where economic development criteria is actually put into resolutions and ordinances, and that allows that public input. We haven't had that public input here on it except for tonight, just a very little bit at the beginning. I'd like to see us define our sales tax incentive program in more detail, so it's not a matter of kind of a grab bag, but it's a matter of maybe a matrix with a certain set of circumstances and definitions, so their business coming in has some idea whether they qualify or don't, and why. Clearly, there's going to be other businesses that are going to look for these kinds of benefits because we've said that it's important, but it's difficult to tell them the criteria by which they're going to be accepted or not accepted, and it does raise questions about why some were picked and some were not. So to make it short, that's the other problem that's in the room tonight. But that's something that is because we're basically flying an airplane and we're trying to repair it at the same time because these issues haven't been addressed in the previous number of years. And the economic situation today, with all what is going on, requires us to be able to address it in some way, and we're just not adequately doing it yet. So that's the problem, but that's not Breckenridge Brewery's problem, and it doesn't in any way reflect the quality of what they're trying to do and the intent of the city to bring the proper partners in.
Jerry.
And Bruce, thanks for coming. I know tonight you were almost not going to be able to make it, so
How are you holding up?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay.
It is. Thank you for showing up. I agree with Bruce. It would have been nice to have more time to consider this. I didn't like the idea of getting it so late. In the last couple of weeks, I've had an opportunity to talk with many folks about Breckenridge coming to Littleton. It's exciting. A lot of folks out there are excited about it happening, but it isn't ready to happen right now. It's still a little premature to say that it's definitely going to happen. Again, I wish I had more time to consider this information, but we don't. This is what it is. The speakers earlier tonight, many of them, I appreciate their expressing themselves the way they did. One speaker in particular, I think, took us back to the old way Littleton used to do business, with some words that I think were almost inflammatory, and I sure don't appreciate them. And I want to see Littleton moving forward. And while I don't want to see incentives all over the place, what I do want to see is the Littleton to continue to grow revenue-wise. We need it badly. To say, are we picking or being more favorable over some than other businesses, I would say absolutely. There's a few years back where we weren't being so kind with another applicant that was at that same property. And I think this applicant, I think we do want, they came to us, I think it's exciting. I think also that this is a good fit. If it's not this plan, it may be many, many years before another acceptable plan comes in for that particular location. So I will support this. Thank you.
Peggy.
Yeah, man, I appreciate what Bruce has said. For 4 days, I've been studying this. I've been emailing the city manager back and forth. I came down and talked to him, and I've changed my mind 2 and 3 times each day. I'm still trying to decide what my mind's going to do, but as I talk, I think I'll make it up. we do want to attract new businesses, and we've got the economic plan, but that plan was passed after we did the rezoning for this, and I was, as the city manager knows, quite disappointed to not know of any discussions that were occurring along these lines when we passed that economic plan before we got this. Bruce said, referred to developing the brand that is Littleton. And for me, the brand that is Littleton means making sure the small businesses thrive as well as the large ones. It means making sure the neighborhoods thrive by making sure that we give incentives to the neighborhood people to keep their houses improved, high quality, and so forth. Because most of what we have is just trying to improve what we have, not developing new things. I really want the brewery to come, but for me, this is not the way to do it. And I hope I get to my car safely tonight, but I just cannot support these incentives. We're going to be raising, at least we said we are, we're going to be raising permit fees for everybody else. It does not make sense to me to be targeting one business when we haven't done that in the past and have repeatedly attracted businesses even during times of recession. This just is not the way for me to do it. And I'm sorry to you guys, but I do hope you'll come anyway.
Jim? You don't have to say anything? Okay.
I'm ready to move forward.
Okay, I'm sure you are. So is Jerry. I'm going to support this evening, and I think that one of the things that resonates with me is someone earlier, a member of the public, came down and talked about for 20 years we had a program and it worked, and why do something different? Why do this? Well, yeah, for 20 years it did what it did, but did it really work? I don't know that we could have attracted a Breckenridge brewery without having a more vigorous attitude, a more vigorous outlook on the potentials and possibilities of the community. I think that we have very clearly stated in our budget meetings that the general fund, being primarily a sales tax-based fund, we've got an outlook that, based on the city needs and the infrastructure that needs to be done and some of the other things in the years that we just came out of putting deferred maintenance, that we're going to have to make some difficult decisions. And so I think that it is an opportunity for us to, with our economic development, working on that for a year and a half. We heard about incentives. We talked about incentives. We will be seeing more incentives. People are asking for these. We aren't seeing a lot of the businesses that come in and ask for them. They don't. It doesn't even get past staff. They're unrealistic expectations. They're not incentives that are appropriate. So I think things get vetted out pretty well before we see them. This, quite honestly, to me, a cumulative rebate to Breckenridge Brewery of $300,000, and we are looking at a Gold Star business who's moving from Denver to Littleton. We're looking at a business who's investing millions of dollars into the location that they've chosen, which is a very, very, in my opinion, I'd even call it blighted in some of the areas. Sorry, Mike. But it's a very damaged piece of property. It has a lot of problems. It has grade issues. It has water issues. It has drainage issues. And we've got a couple of folks here who look at that and say, you know, we're willing to make the investment in this property, because we believe that we can get the return back from the community. And as a member of the community, I feel like a $300,000 investment, which quite honestly is not money out of our pockets. This is money that hasn't even come to our pockets. This is a good plan, and I'm going to support it. Any other discussions? Ready to vote?
The vote is 6 in favor, with Councilmember Cole voting no. The motion carries.
Okay, item 9B. Let me get to my thing. It's the adoption of a resolution approving an agreement regarding the dedication of land between the City of Littleton and Meadowwood Corporation. Glenn?
Mayor and council members, we've spoke about a lot of the things that are part of the Meadowwood agreement, and I'll be brief and just point out a couple of things that hasn't been discussed. It does closely, or it does exactly mirror the agreement you just approved. One of the things that's in addition to this is there's an existing access easement that provides access to the Freeman property, South Suburban, and Meadowwood, and the City of Littleton is part of that easement as well. So this agreement basically agrees that on the behalf of the City of Littleton that we would release that easement because we'll have a public street to take its place. Again, the agreement talks about that they would dedicate the additional right-of-way for the entryway onto Santa Fe, and that they would agree to participate if they redevelop the site in Briarwood and in the traffic light. And then the other thing regarding the drainage easement, there is a section in this agreement that says the city agrees to provide for a way for that stormwater that's coming across Breckenridge and designed by Sundown site, that we provide a mechanism to get it to the South Platte River, which is ultimately where the stormwater ends up. And also that the same kind of agreement as with Breckenridge Brewery, that we hold them harmless basically for future improvements to solve that regional drainage issue, so that we won't come back to Meadowwood and say, you know what, we want the pipe going across your property. It basically, they have hit their requirement as far as contributing to that regional solution. So that's it in a nutshell. Mayor and Council, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Jim?
Lynn, on the resolution on page 2 of the recitals, just before the word agreement begins, on the next to last whereas, you need to correct the DSB to DBS.
Oh, thank you.
And on the next page of the agreement, I wanted to talk about number 6 first, which is the city drainage easement. And I understand what we've talked about. I understand the maps. Very good about reading those. But I believe in number 6 that when we are forever excusing Meadowwood from any obligations to handle the stormwater that comes across or could potentially come across Santa Fe, they get a direct benefit from that. And why is there no portion of Meadowwood having to pay a small fee for Breckenridge and Designs to handle all of that themselves, when the benefit is really, a lot of it is Meadowwood?
Again, I think when staff went into this agreement, we looked at the drainage issue as a regional issue, not necessarily a Meadowwood issue or a Breckenridge issue. And yes, some of the stormwater, because of where they lie, ends up on the Meadowwood site. But I think with being able to solve that issue by the drainage going through the Breckenridge, and it provides a good vehicle, it makes a lot of sense in the location that it's provided. And that we get more of a redevelopable property for Meadowwood. I think the city benefits from that. So that was our philosophy going into it, is it's a regional issue. It should be a city or a drainage district issue to help solve that.
It is a benefit to both Meadowwood and Designs, but on the other hand, they're being penalized because it's their property that has to take care of this drainage problem. And part of the benefit is to both them as well as to Meadowwood. And yet we're not requiring Meadowwood to have any portion of the payment for having Designs and Breckenridge losing part of their property for this drainage easement that they can't build on, they can't put a structure on, they can't do lots of things on, and eventually a 40-foot wide swath right between their properties. And there is a benefit to Meadowwood to having that put between Designs and Breckenridge. So why shouldn't they have some portion, I don't care how small it is, being paid toward the cost of these improvements? That's issue 1.
I understand.
All right, issue 2 is up on number 4. And this again, in the previous agreement, which is doing with EDA, the 10 years that's in this agreement as well as in the other agreement. With EDA, they probably are going to redevelop or do something within the next 10 years. I fully expect that to happen. With Meadowwood, I don't know whether that will happen within 10 years and get a cost recovery for that signal. There is a direct benefit to every resident who lives in those manufactured homes right now to have that traffic light put in. It would give them much more safe entrance and exits from their property and in and out of their property, and therefore it's a direct benefit immediately upon that installation of that signal. Yet this agreement says that they're not going to pay anything until the property redevelops, and if it's 10 years in one day, they don't pay cent one. And that, again, I do not think is fair. So when we get to the point, I'll make a motion to change the 10 years to another figure.
Understand.
Any other questions, comments? Peggy?
Yeah, on that same page that Jim said you needed to change DSB to DBS.
On the resolution, Councilmember?
In the actual agreement, either you need to explain to me what something means or there's a word missing. In item 2 of the agreement, termination of existing easement, in the second sentence, city further agrees that it shall use commercially reasonable efforts cause Freeman, I think it's efforts to cause, maybe? Is that?
Yes, there's probably a 2 missing there.
Okay.
I would see that, yep.
I try to read these carefully, and I may miss something else, but that one jumped out at me just like the DSB did. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we need a motion.
I move that the City Council adopt Resolution 13-16, approving the agreement for dedication of land between, and hold on, I have to go, the City of Littleton and the Meadowwood Corporation, subject to final review and approval by the City Attorney.
Need a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Jim?
On item number 4 on page 3 of the agreement, based upon what was the comments that were made by the city manager and city attorney, I want to change 10 years to 20 years. I move to change 10 to 20.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to change 10 to 20 years under section 4. Bruce?
Me?
You.
Just, I guess, a clarification. This is a resolution approving an agreement between the City of Meadowwood to dedicate 2 segments of right-of-way for Briarwood to release an existing easement, provide partial funding for the construction of Briarwood Avenue, and to provide drainage easement, so forth and so on. So, I mean, there is value being contributed, notwithstanding the cost share issue. Am I missing that? I mean, is there? It's not like they're getting something of value in the traffic signal, but they're contributing something of value in terms of the partial funding for the street, the drainage easement, so forth and so on. You're saying that's not quid pro quo, is what I'm hearing.
That is correct, and the very fact that there is immediately upon that signal becoming active, there is a very direct benefit to the citizens in those manufactured homes. And in 10 years and 1 day, they would pay absolutely nothing for that benefit to occur for those 10 years. So I think that changing it to 20 years is certainly more equitable.
Does anybody, is there an educated guess as to what kind of money we're talking about?
The light's $225,000.
Right, so some percentage of that number.
Oh, okay.
Depending upon it says in here, depending upon the development that goes on, redevelopment goes on to Meadowood if it occurs.
Jerry, you were pretty good about getting an estimate out of them last time. You want to work them over a little bit?
You get one good estimate a night.
That's right. Okay.
Okay.
Just to point out, there'll be a conflict between the two agreements because the agreement you just approved provided cost recovery for 10 years, and then this will provide cost recovery for 20. So if you want this to trump, I ask that I be able to draft something in that notwithstanding what's in the previous agreement, the cost recovery on this portion, just the traffic signal, will be for 20 years.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct, because the last time
For
we were talking about other
Meadowood.
things.
For Meadowood.
Specifically for Meadowood.
As this, the traffic signal access control plan.
And the other agreement was dealing with ETA primarily.
Well, it dealt with cost recovery from both neighboring properties. So I would just ask that I be allowed to draft something and that this will take precedence for the Meadowood property and just with the traffic signal.
Bruce?
They're paying for part of the paving already. I mean, contributed 20, 31, 35,000, whatever it is.
But again, just to make sure I understand this, changing this to 20 years just means it still only gets triggered if the property is redeveloped within 20 years instead of 10.
That's right.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, so we have an amendment. Did we get a second on the amendment?
Yeah, I
Okay, sorry. So we have an amendment to change 10 years to 20 years under item 4. The vote is 2 in favor with 5 opposed. The motion fails. Jerry needs to vote. Oh, sorry, yes.
Oh, gee, I thought you did. Sorry. Thought I had.
The motion still fails. Okay.
I was looking up there going, wait, I didn't look right. What time is it? Where's that?
I know. Okay, so we're back to the original motion, which is a motion to approve the resolution agreement regarding the dedication of land between the City of Littleton and Meadowood Corp. Ready to vote?
I'm sorry, hang on.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries. Okay.
I gotta think where I was again.
Okay, so we have one more item under general business. Item,
One more? 9C.
9C. Upon the completion of this item, we'll take a break. Charlie?
Council, this is a resolution adopting an amendment to an intergovernmental agreement with Urban Drainage and Flood Control District to appropriate additional funds for the Littles Creek Storm Drainage Project. The money is appropriated in the storm drainage and the sanitary sewer funds. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to address them.
Charlie, if you don't mind, I just wanted to make one point that you've indicated in here that our share is higher because of the improvements to the sewer?
The sanitary sewer.
Sanitary sewer, okay.
Right.
Jim?
Charlie, does the motion need to have anything in there about that there's no need to indicate a walking path at this time? Because the request came in to specifically do that.
We're not addressing the pedestrian path at this time. Nothing being done with this project would preclude later putting in the pedestrian path, but under staff analysis on the second page of the communication, I do address some of the issues that would be faced in installing a path on the median, but we would not include it in this project because urban drainage will not pay anything for it, and it would be entirely city expense. And if you want to do it at a later time, it's still open for discussion. Go ahead.
I just think that the price you're paying for putting that in is too high to pay. And that's why I asked the question that we put in there that there's no walking path being indicated or planned at this time.
Yeah, we were silent on it.
What again?
He said we were silent on it.
Oh.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, I need a motion.
I move the resolution authorizing the Second Amendment to an IGA between the City of Littleton and Urban Drainage and Flood Control District be approved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ready to vote?
Jerry voted.
Ready.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay, we'll take a break till 10 p.m. On first reading, this is a ordinance, correct? Okay. So, Kristen, please.
This is an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, approving renewal of a lease of land from the United States Department of the Army for public park and recreational purposes.
Okay, Charlie?
Council, this is an ordinance with authorizing an agreement with the Department of Army of the United States for use of the land at South Platte Park for the parking lot at C470 and the access driveway. We've been using it for the last 10 years, and they are authorizing us with another 10-year via one-year instruments. And that's the way they want to do it. In exchange for that, we pay nothing.
Why only 10 years?
Because that's what they said. They don't go beyond 10 years.
And they got the guns?
They have a lot of them.
They're the Army. Other questions, Bruce?
Charlie, this is kind of like the question that Councilmember Valdez asked. Who keeps track of all these 10-year leases and those kinds of things? Because the council communication says it expired, so, now we're playing catch-up. But
who keeps track of them in the city?
Is it the city attorney's office that we would expect to do that now?
Well, the city clerk, city attorney would get a copy. Our engineering office, we have a gentleman there who also keeps track of recovery agreements that have gone back over 35 years. And we have a file on it that it comes up and says, okay, you got to redo that every time.
Because this is another one we don't want to miss, because it is a benefit. I mean,
That just goes to prove my amendments a while ago of trying to extend that recovery period would have worked.
The city attorney and the city attorney's office and I are working on just that thing. We're working on a project of getting so that we know when things are coming up and when they're going to expire, so that we're catching them before it happens instead of after.
Great. Jim?
On page 4, it's page 102 out of the packet numbers, or however you're tracking it. It talks about accounts, records, and receipts, and it says who keeps track of the revenue and expenditure reports that annually have to be made to the district engineer, and who does this calculation of?
Scott Latona from South Suburban Parks and Recreation has been doing it, so they keep track, and so do we. And other than the paving of the road, we don't have any other expenses other than maintenance.
That gets reported annually to the district engineer?
Yes, it does.
The second question I've got is on page 111, of the packet, or the last page of this resolution. Why is it, I'll never get there, why is it that we can't renew these prior to the expiration dates?
Yeah.
Because the Army sometimes tells me what to do, and sometimes I actually do it. This is their agreement.
For somebody could tell you what to do, Charlie? Come on now.
In this case, they said, this is our agreement, take it.
I understand that, but
I don't mean to be
they
so
don't
hard
care.
on it, but that's what they said.
Because in this agreement, it says once it expires, there's all kinds of penalties and things that's got to happen. But if they're not interested in enforcing that part, then who cares?
Bruce?
Most of this is good old-fashioned boilerplate, but a curiosity, Section 7 says that lessee shall comply with all applicable federal laws and regulations and so forth and so on. It begs the question, what are we going to do about marijuana? Do we have to, since marijuana is federally illegal, if we permit someone smoking marijuana in the parking lot, we're technically in violation of the lease? Do we have to post signs that say you can't smoke marijuana in the parking lot?
Public consumption is illegal in Colorado.
Part of that.
No, it's just within, it was a...
Your curiosity?
Public consumption. Yeah,
What
it's
about
illegal.
What about in a vehicle?
No,
Yeah,
it's,
nowhere where you
No.
can be seen from public view, so you can't be
Okay.
in your car smoking.
Okay, good, all right, then.
However,
Thank you.
if that were to be patrolled by a federal law enforcement agent, he might very well make an arrest and charge the federal crime, because they do check the federal property, so that maybe it's worthwhile to have federal signs up there, just as we try to deal with Amendment 64.
Just curious.
That deals with
Okay.
it. You know, we're just going to have intermittent federal property.
just declare the city federal property. Any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I will open the hearing. We have no one who's signed up to speak. Paul? No? Okay, so I will close the public hearing, and I need a motion.
I move the ordinance approving the lease renewal with the United States Department of Army for continued use of the spillway area of the Chatfield Lake project property for public park and recreation uses be approved on first reading, and a public hearing scheduled for July 2nd, 2013.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Peggy seconded.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Ready to vote? Jerry?
Voted.
Okay.
Thanks for checking.
The vote is unanimous, the motion carries.
Okay, item 11B, this is also an ordinance and on first reading and a public hearing. Kristen?
It's an ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, granting permanent utility easement to Public Service Company of Colorado at the Littleton Englewood wastewater treatment plant.
Charlie?
Council, this is an ordinance in public hearing regarding an easement that would be placed on the property at the Littleton Englewood wastewater treatment plant to provide natural gas to some existing temporary trailers that will become permanent. They need an easement to install the gas line that would be to our benefit.
Any questions? Jim?
I have a question. Is there enough methane gas recovery there that they could provide the heating for this building?
The conversion process to take the methane so that it could heat the building at a distant site doesn't work for this. And it's cheaper to actually go through the natural gas process.
Because that methane is just disposed of.
We can heat the digester buildings with the methane. The rest of it we burn off. But to move that methane and convert it to heat at another site is much more complicated.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, this is a public hearing. So there's no one signed up on the roster. Paul? Okay. So I will close the public hearing, and I need a motion.
I move the ordinance approving an easement to Public Service Company of Colorado at the Littleton Englewood wastewater treatment plant for the installation of a natural gas line be approved and a public hearing be scheduled for July 2, 2013.
Second.
Okay, Jerry got the second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor, the motion carries.
Okay, item 11C is another ordinance on first reading and public hearing. Kirsten?
An ordinance of the City of Littleton, Colorado, approving environmental covenants for a portion of the land known as Reynolds Landing and Saperchi Open Space.
Council, this one's a little more complicated.
Yes.
We own the Saperchi property. South Suburban owns the Reynolds Landing property. Right on the property line and a certain distance in each direction is an area of contamination that we have been working with for over 10 years. Our environmental engineer has found a way to say we can end that testing and remediation. If we declare this parcel to be an environmental covenant protected area, we no longer have to continue the testing and remediation, which is costing us about $20,000 a year. I said, bingo, what do we do? And they said, create this environmental covenant so that there are no structures or other facilities within that confined area, which is very small. And furthermore, you have to tell South Suburban if you're going to do any excavation in this area, and they will have to tell you if they do any excavation. South Suburban has already approved their environmental covenant on the Reynolds Landing portion. We're asking you to approve an environmental covenant on the Saperchi city-owned property, as well as consent to the one on the Reynolds Landing property. With this, we will file the paperwork with the county, not the health department, in order to prevent us from, or preclude us from doing any further environmental testing of this area and saving us significant amount of money.
Questions? Bruce?
Charlie, does it end up on a zoning map, or how is it memorialized?
It'll be a covenant. It'll be a deed restriction on the property.
Okay.
Phil?
Charlie, what's the nature of the contamination?
Oh, I knew you'd ask.
Didn't you have the answer? There's two different listings in the...
BTEX, benzene, toluene, and two others.
You don't want to brush your teeth with it.
But it was remediated.
It was oil-based contaminations.
From the equipment that was there?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Bruce and then Jim.
This doesn't have any impact on the Saperchi lease.
None whatsoever.
Thanks.
Did the environmental engineer believe there is no migration to this pollution?
Correct.
Secondly, on the resolution, it's page 145 of the packet. It's the first environmental covenant. It talks about South Suburban Park and Recreation District. They are no longer district. Their official name is South Suburban Park and Recreation. I don't know if that makes any difference.
Understood. Okay.
And then the third question I've got is there is a box on the map that's on page 144. Is the northern boundary of that box match up with the southern boundary of the box on page 149? Or I may have the directions upside down.
Does the northern box match to the southern box lines? Yes,
And
they
so
do.
The southern box is city property.
Yes.
And because they're entirely different drawings.
Yes.
That's what was confusing.
That's right. But they do match and they are contiguous.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Charlie. This is public hearing. No one signed up on the roster. Paul, this is your last opportunity. Okay, good.
State your name and address.
I'll close the public hearing. I need a motion.
Madam Chairman, I move to approve the ordinance adopting environmental covenants on the Saperchi property and a public hearing be set for July 2, 2013.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor, the motion carries.
Okay, seeing no other business, we are adjourned.
All right.